Okay, so allegedly we're live now.
Allegedly. Let me check. Uh, Wait, the craftsmen are live? There's no
Craftsmen
way.
are live. It's a good angle. Oh, I look very professional with my.
Oh, you do look so professional. Fuck.
Dude, I look pretty professional with my mic right here.
You look like a real guy.
I look like a real guy. Like I do this kind of shit.
Mm, like on that gang gang.
On that chain gang,
hmm
referencing the song, of course.
By which song?
I've been
No,
working
I need
on
you
the
to know. I need you to.
chain gang. That's not how it
That's not.
goes.
That's not it.
It goes.
Uh,
Don't you hear them growling their lives away? And
yeah,
then you
yeah.
hear somebody say,
Boom,
"Huh!
boom, boom, boom.
Huh!
Yeah, that's it.
Don't you
That's the
know?"
one.
That's the one.
That's the one.
There's that song, and then there's another one called "I've been working on the railroad all
That's.
the live long day," and so I got I got the songs mixed up.
Oh, I see that you have a DM from a special friend of ours.
I do. You don't know him? Oh, maybe.
Oh, I do actually know him,
Oh
but I thought it was
yeah,
I
Christopher.
thought that was yeah.
Christopher Hitchens live on Discord.
Wait a minute, no wait. We got Chris Histrons on the fucking pod.
On the pod. Dude, I wish he would have lived to see the internet age. That would have been so interesting.
I mean, when did he die?
Like 2012, 11. Like he
Mm,
right before it was a
like
thing. It
it
was
became like a
yeah.
real big issue. Yeah,
Yeah, which kind of sucks because he would have done so well. Like a Christopher Hitchens podcast would have been so
killer.
interesting. That would have been so interesting. Just because like how versatile he is and things he could talk about. Like it wouldn't even just have to be his whole atheism stuff. I mean, he could talk about his books and poetry, and he would talk about Orwell, and he did social critiques. Like, he was in Spain in a revolution. Like, like he was a part of all the left wing movements of his time, and so he really is like a I don't know, he's just like a rarity. Like you don't see people like that who have a voice. Like people more left leaning.
Yeah, were you hitch slapped?
I was hitch slapped when I was I was I was hitch slapped when I was 14.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I think I do know how. What happened was my aunt, she had the book I think it was called God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything.
That's crazy.
And so I didn't actually see him on a YouTube video first or like on the internet like everybody else found him. I actually found his book first and then was curious after reading the book and was like, "Oh, okay, let's see what he has to say." Then got into the debates and I think it was a good critique for the time.
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree.
Uh
Now it's a little outdated,
it's a
but
bit outdated and the commentary or like the discourse has kind of evolved. Um they're far more philosophical now. It's which is interesting. Like religious debates are now very philosophical, which is good, I think. Obviously it's bad. I mean, but it's also not bad to have one that is on the realm of like, okay, what are the merits of these religions and their impacts on our society? Like, you don't have to be philosophical to debate the merits of something.
yeah,
Or
just a sociological polemic or whatever.
and I'm perfectly okay with that kind of analysis too. Like at that time, he was talking about what he coined Islamic fascism, um, which I think is a very unique and a very unique point that we don't hear in the discourse, right? No, nobody articulates it as that. It's just an argument on like just biasy and like prejudice rather than actual like critique. But
I mean, the question is like when he says Islamic fascism,
yeah,
what
because
does he mean? What does he mean by that?
well, I don't want to misquote the hitch slapper. I'm pretty.
Because I mean, like, how is what are the fascist tendencies of religions or whatever?
Well, I know that particularly in like. So I'm pretty sure he was writing on the Middle Eastern countries that we were in conflict with in the early 2000s.
hmm
And I'm pretty sure that statement that he coined was in relation to the forms of government Islamic states had and that they possess, and how they disparage women's rights, disparage rights of homosexuals. I mean, they kill them in some places. I think that's what he was particularly critical of, was the deliberate refusal of democratic liberty that we here in the West would, well, some of us here in the West,
Some of us. Some of us.
some of us here in the West would say is a good thing. Um, I'll be right back, Cameron. I gotta help my girl real quick. Carry the show on.
Fuck. Um. All right. Well, I'm gonna just look around for things to talk about. Uh, establish a repertoire of potential videos to analyze. Um, and see what Brandon might want to talk about when he comes back. Um. So there's this playlist by Unsolicited Advice, Joe from Unsolicited Advice. Every atheist argument debunked by an atheist. So maybe we can watch this one. Let's see if it's yeah, it just really depends on where Brandon wants to take the conversation, but there's I'm just gonna draw from my list of watch later videos. Uh, um Kind of sucks that you can't see my screen. Thanks, Brandon. Let's go, Brandon. Um, Another thing I was interested in talking about was modern monetary theory. Um, that might be interesting because Brandon is, in fact, finance oriented and economics oriented. So maybe Brandon can help dissect modern monetary theory, provide like an alternative to our conception of the relationship that government ought to have to taxes and money more generally. Um, let's see. Is the situation hopeless? Are we fucked? Yeah, we are fucked.
I'm back.
I'm back.
Welcome back. You're dual speeching, I think.
What did I miss?
Oh, I was just taking some videos from my watch later playlist and putting them in the Discord in case we want to
I'll be back again.
watch
Hold
them.
on.
Okay. Uh, mm, 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 mm.
Okay, now we're good.
Um,
So yes, you were showing videos of.
well, I was just putting videos in our Discord for the possible interesting things to talk about. So three general ideas. So there's this, Unsolicited Advice. I think you liked his
I do.
videos. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, every atheist argument debunked by an atheist. It just really depends whether you want to talk about like theology or here's a second video. Elon Musk discovers MMT is true. So I wasn't thinking about this video in particular, but there's this thing called modern monetary theory that we were talking about before, or that I was trying to talked to you with about before. I think
Yeah, we
I
never.
brought it up.
Yeah, we never really got into it.
Um, and I think that that might be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, we can get
Given that
into it.
we're interested in like based on like yesterday's conversation, trying to establish like alternative modes of conceptualizing people's relationship to the state.
Yep.
Um, and then and now is like a really good channel that has fuck you.
Mm.
Mm. That has good videos on like the rise and fall of mainstream media. There's a really good video on Marxism that I watched where he kind of we that's the guy we watched the Kant video from.
Mm.
Uh Go back to watching that Kant video.
Oh,
You
he was
remember?
that guy who was walking around nature, and like
Yeah.
each scene was like a different part of Kant's argument. Like he was at this rock, and he was like, "Ah, yeah. So this is."
Yeah.
Yeah.
The quantity of an object.
Yeah. No, I mean that was cool.
But I think his Marxism video is more interesting.
Oh, he has one on Sir Karl Marx.
Yeah, he has one on Marx. He has one on Hegel. He has one on Spinoza. The Spinoza video was really influential for me,
He
actually.
did a Spinoza one too.
Yeah. Um,
Deficit dogmas.
um,
Checkmate, atheist.
get shit on, atheist. Get
Okay.
hitch slapped.
Um.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
so
so yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
these are just like, yeah, these are just things that I was considering.
Okay. I mean, we can do. I mean, because obviously we can probably cover all of them. I mean, how
Yeah,
long are
just
these videos?
uh, long.
Are they?
I think that unsolicited advice video is 45 minutes, something like that.
Okay, so maybe or oh, unsolicited advices. Okay, well, if your
Um,
question is, what would you rather talk about, economics or religion?
yeah,
I'm
that's the
okay.
question I'm asking
I'm okay
you.
with either. I have no preference actually.
Yeah, I don't
Maybe
really know.
maybe the MMT might be more interesting because I actually don't know much about that, so I can kind of learn about it as we.
Yeah, let's I'm gonna find a different video though.
Okay.
Let's because he has a video where he really like
Ex-
describes
mm-hmm.
um so I'm gonna try to find that. Um, so there's a very short video. It's very short, I say.
Too short.
There's so he has a video essay on it, which is 35 minutes, and then he has a podcast on it where he's talking with economists about it. Um, so if you want a shorter introduction,
Maybe the one with the economy or okay. How long was the short one you said?
uh, 35 minutes,
Okay.
versus let me find the other channel real quick. I wish I were. I wish I were a little bit taller. I wish I were a baller.
Wish I knew.
That too.
A second.
Let's see.
You wanted me,
I do wish I knew.
but I do. Should have had a clue. Mm-mm-mm.
Where is it?
Where art thou?
Wherefore art thou, MMT? Oh, MMT and Marxism. That's the video. But I don't know if that's the video I'm thinking of. That's the one I watched when I was in China. China. Let's see. Capitalist Power, a new theory of capitalism. I think that's the original one. Oh, arguments against modern monetary theory. But where's those arguments for modern monetary theory?
Cameron's like, I don't want to see what's against it.
Well, I'd like to hear about what it is first. So you can get the antagonistic view, and then we can get the response. And so maybe we have a little bit of a dialectic, yeah?
Yeah,
First, that requires knowing what the fuck it is.
indeed. I could always just look it up.
Okay, look it up then.
You know, reading is always an option, Cameron,
Reading's hard
for some.
for all Americans.
MMT, or modern
Monetary
monetary
theory.
theory. Okay. Let's take a look at Investopedia. Okay. Modern monetary theory. Definitions, history, and principles. Okay, very nice.
Fact checked by Yarlit Perez.
Experienced multimedia journalist and was a master of science in journalism, worked in multiple cities, breaking news, politics, her expertise in personal finance, investing, and real estate. Cool.
Real fact checker over here.
Okay. Seems like she might be a good one. So, what is it? A heterodox macroeconomic supposition that asserts that monetarily sovereign countries such as the US, UK, Canada, which spend, tax, borrow in a in a fiat currency. Of course, fiat to our audience meaning our currency isn't exchangeable to anything that is real, that they fully control, are not operationally constrained by revenues. That is true. They are not operationally constrained by revenues when it comes to federal government spending. Yes, because obviously with the fiat currency, the idea is that you can just keep printing money. It's not based in anything. Like when we had a gold standard, you would have to actually exchange those values. So the argument proposed, at least in what it's saying, is that it wouldn't make sense that you would be constrained. Okay. Put simply, modern monetary theory decrees that such governments do not rely on taxes or borrowing for spending since they can just, literally what I was saying. Since they can print money as they need and are the monopoly issuer of the currency. Okay, cool. Since their budgets aren't like regular households, their policies should not be shaped by fears of rising national debt. Well, I can already see some holes in this, but we'll keep reading. Several other differences also exist between mainstream monetary theory and mainstream and modern. Okay, so there's two variances here. Okay. The sequence of events that emerges from loans and deposits and from government spending and taxes. Okay. I had to say bye to mama. Okay. MMT challenges conventional belief. Okay, it's just the takeaways. Okay. Or
Go further.
huh?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was like that was it.
Yep, that's it. Good.
I was like, the key takeaways. I was like, oh, here's the three little paragraphs, and here are the key takeaways. I was like, oh, okay, that's it. Cool, thanks. Okay.
Okay. So let's see what the core principles are. 3. Number 1, large government debt isn't the precursor to collapse. Countries like the US can sustain greater deficits without concern. And a small deficit or surplus can be extremely harmful and cause a recession, since deficit spending is what builds people's savings. Wait. Small deficit or surplus can be harmful. Oh, okay. Because it'll cause a recession. Wait, but wasn't it just arguing that? Okay, whatever. Okay. MMT theorists explain that debt is simply money that the government put into the economy and didn't tax back.
That sounds right for a fiat currency, right?
Um, e, yeah, for now, yes. They also argue that comparing a government's budgets to that of an average household is a mistake. Okay. I mean, that's also something I'd imagine would be contended by economists, but let's keep reading. While supporters of modern monetary theory acknowledge that inflation is theoretically a possible outcome, they say it is highly unlikely and can be fought with policy decisions in the future if required. They often cite the example of Japan, which has much higher public debt than the US. Okay. It's highly unlikely. Okay, so they're just saying that, okay, yeah, so it can be fought with policy decisions. Okay.
Yeah. So like one example is like minimum job guarantees or job guarantees and particular minimum wages and other types of things that are supposed to stop possibility of like inflation happening by price capping certain goods or whatever. Um, but anyway,
Yeah, I can already see how this is going to become how this is going to get complicated soon. Like real economic spiel. Okay, government money creation. According to the only limit that the government has when it comes to spending is the availability of real resources, like workers and supplies. Okay, when spending is too great with respect to resources, inflation can surge. If decision makers are not careful. Okay, taxes create an ongoing demand for currency. They are told to make money. That is getting overheated. Yes, increased taxes slow down the money supply. Indeed. Um, well, maybe not. But anyway, this goes against the conventional idea that taxes are primarily meant to provide the government with money. Yes, that is true. We do believe that taxes provide the government with money so that we can have infrastructure, fund social welfare programs. Okay, indeed. What happens if you were to go to your IRA? Okay, is this an actual? Okay, we don't need to read that. Okay. Modern monetary theory says that government doesn't need to sell bonds to borrow money, since that money it can create on its own. Okay. The government sells bonds to drain excess reserves. That is true. And it hits overnight interest rate target. Yes, also true. Thus, the existence of bonds, which Mossler calls savings accounts at the Fed, is not a requirement for the government, but a policy choice. Um, yeah, so obviously, I guess I get the gist of it that money is fiat. Let's say their argument is that money is fiat. It's fake. It's not, real. And so we can always just allocate however much we need or don't need because it's fake. We can always control that. And so, what are we doing?
so the idea of taxes, and I think modern monetary theory is rather than you're supposed to be collecting a pool of money from like tax holders or whatever, or from tax recipients or whatever. What you're supposed to be doing instead is thinking about it like the whole point of a tax is to decrease the spending power of particular individuals within your economy. So the reason that you would have high taxes on a individual with like $100 trillion or whatever is because if this individual has too much money and they're not being taxed with it, that gives them significantly higher buying power with respect to the government. So if the government is supposed to be the arbiter of having currency or whatever, they can't just keep on printing too much currency or else it'll really cause inflation or whatever. But the way that you're supposed to circumnavigate that type of inflation is not to like the reason that taxing is supposed to decrease inflation in this regard is because it's it's like increasing the value of the dollar because some people within it who like some particular stakeholder within the economy now has less access to it. And
Hmm.
so by virtue of like
It's a form of deflation.
yeah. And so like it's a different like just a different orientation of like the same principles, I think.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting to watch I do want to watch the Economist video. I think it is going to be interesting. Um, and very informative also. But yeah, okay. So I'm getting the gist of this. Unemployment is the result of government spending too little while collecting taxes, according to MMT. Obviously, like this would be contended as well. It says those looking for work and unable to find a job in the private sector should be given minimum wage transition jobs, funded by the government and managed by the local community. I mean, that's fine. I don't know. That's not really an economic, or it shouldn't be a. Okay, this
Well, the
labor.
reason that it's an economic is that the problem with like MMT like non MMT allegedly like mainstream monetary theory or whatever is that like uh you're not ever supposed to actually reach zero unemployment. That's bad for
Yeah.
an economy. But the
Wait, but why?
restructuring
Why
of
is it bad for an economy?
I think because if you have zero unemployment, then something with like the uh the value of labor goes
Hmm.
up
Oh,
or whatever.
that could be true. If everyone's working, then um, then well, if everyone's working, then I think that would hurt workers because there'd be no bargaining power. Nobody could take their jobs if everybody had a job. There's no, there's nothing changing. The market can't change your wage.
Yeah.
I think that's my speculation on it because part of unemployment is that there are people looking for jobs. Corporations will look around and say, "Oh, okay, well this guy doesn't have a job and he wants to hire." But if everyone had one, you can't ever get rid of your employees. Like it'd be a pain in the ass, you know? I think.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, yeah,
I
yeah. It
think.
just depends on like how you quantify like unemployment or whatever as like a because like it could be unemployment in the private sector, but could also just be like unemployment in the public sector. And if you had like, everybody's employed, and so like everybody's guaranteed. Like there's this idea of like basic, rather than having universal basic income, there's this idea of like universal basic services and like job guarantee. Thumbs up. And a job guarantee is like trying to thumbs up circumnavigate a lot of the problems with, you know, whatever. Anyway, uh, they'll get into this in the video, I'm sure.
Okay, it was developed by these people. Bears similarities to older schools who thought like functional finance, chartalism. I've actually never heard of that. Malthus first began thinking about some of the concepts that from the theory in the 70s when he began working as a trader. He used the idea to place smart bets at the hedge fund. He's a hedge funder. Okay. Um, Malthus understood it wasn't a possibility. His firm and his clients became the largest holder of the Italian bonds outside it. Italy did not default and instead made 100 million in profit. Uh, bachelor,
University of Connecticut.
bachelor's in economics. He was ignored by the academic world. In '93, he published an essay called "Soft Currency Economics" and shared it on a post-Keynesian listserv.
Yeah, listserv. Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
I think it's um like a website kind of thing, I think.
Oh, over email.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Okay.
In the 90s.
I was gonna say, yeah, that makes sense because this was in the '90s, so this would be, yeah, that's why I didn't write. Okay. Um, and then he found Australian economist Bill Mitchell.
Yeah, Bill Mitchell's the guy that he actually ends up talking with in the video.
Cool. Okay, that's
So,
interesting. Okay, grew in large part thanks to, of course, the internet. So everybody knows things on the internet. Where economists explained,
true.
where economists explained the theory. Okay. $1 trillion. Okay. I don't think Greenspan saying pay as you go. Benefits are insecure. Okay. All right. I think we're ready for the video. Unless you want to continue reading into the. Oh well, fine.
Um,
Actually, let's finish it. We're almost done.
yeah, okay.
Political leaders like AOC in the burn espoused MMT. Economist Stephen Kelton came across. Okay, that's irrelevant. Okay. A paradigm shift from a two-body problem solving to a three-body problem solving. Okay. Classic economics paradigm is characterized as two-body, where taxes equal money in, okay, and spending equals money out. Yes, that is true. Okay, MMT turns the tax and spending factors into a three. Let's hear it. It takes into account the fact that sovereign governments can legally print their own money. Thus, spending or printing new money is legal and no problem as long as spending new money into the economy keeps these three indicators healthy: employment, inflation, and continued investment. Okay. So spending is legal and no longer a problem. Okay. Because we can print our own money. It's fiat. Okay, cool. Yeah. Let's hear the criticism. It's been called naive and irresponsible.
Oh no.
American economist Thomas Paley said, its appeal lies in it being a policy polemic for depressed times. That's a funny one. He's criticized various elements of the theory, like the suggestion that central bank interest rates be maintained at zero. And said it provides no guidance to countries like Mexico and Brazil, and does not take
Well, it's not supposed to.
into account. Well, the reason why he says that, I think, is because our 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 um our currency and how it fluctuates impacts other people. And so,
Mhm.
you see what I'm saying? And so, if you manipulate your currency a certain way, there can be extremely negative consequences, or maybe beneficial to other countries. We don't exist in like a sole,
Yeah.
yeah. Nobel Prize winner Krugman's Nobel Prize winner. Okay, I like hearing those words before an introduction. Yeah. But Krugman has been strongly opposed to the theory. He wrote an op-ed in 11. He warned the U.S. would see hyperinflation if it was put into practice and investors refused to buy bonds. Do the math, and it becomes very clear that any attempt to extract too much from signage, more than a few percent of GDP, probably leads to an infinite upward spiral in inflation. He wrote, in effect, the currency is destroyed. This would not happen even with the same deficit if the government could sell bonds. Okay. Um, how does it differ from mainstream theories of money and banking? It's a falsifiable, which is important, can be proven wrong. Empirical monetary theory that sets out to explain the real world, whereas the mainstream theory sets out from assumptions and then moves to the real world. Okay, which is never typically an always one-to-one
A good
process.
thing.
Yeah, it doesn't always translate, as we know. Critics, however, have argued MMT is not a true theory because there is no mathematical model associated with it. Okay. MMT is essentially a balance sheet approach to macroeconomics that sees government spending accomplished through money creation and not through raising tax. Yes, we know that. Any major difference in the mainstream theory
Ah,
create loans, whereby MMT suggests that loans. Oh, wait, hold on, that's an important sentence. Mainstream theory posits that deposits create loans. Okay. Yes. MMT says loans create deposits. Interesting. Okay. The government can never run out of money. Yes, we know that. As a result, sovereign governments that control their own money, like EU members, can never default. Okay, yes. Since they always can create enough new money to cover Okay, sure. It's like what he said in Italy. Okay. How does it deal with it? Well, high inflation rates should not occur unless there is full employment. But if the government spends too much, the excess demand will also cause inflation. In either case, MMT suggests that inflation can be curtailed by reducing government spending and raising taxes. Sure. Okay, so it's a model positing countries that issue their own currencies are not constrained in their spending. For instance, the country can default on the securities. They can't default. They can simply print more currency. So this is the crux of the argument. Um,
mm.
really, we could have only read like one sentence and gotten the gist of it, but some context, I guess, is cool.
MMT is used in debates over whether the government should increase spending, particularly for progressive policies such as universal health care.
Oh, I see why now this is a big deal. Okay. I was like, dude, this is just a economic theory. Like, why is this even?
Who gives a fuck?
I was like seriously like really confused, but of course now it makes a
Yeah,
lot more
because the whole point
sense.
is always like austerity politics is like we have a limited amount of money, we got our deficit, we have these are real issues that we really need to work with. But if you don't take that approach, you can really now take a more positive approach, like we got to invest in our future, and here's the money that we have to use to do this. And but now the idea of like taxes is supposed to be like guaranteeing the government's ability to perform its central tasks, not because it's like we don't already have this money, but just for the purpose of like redistributing like the purchasing power of the government itself. Um,
An interesting idea. And we're gonna find out.
Next time on Dragon Ball Z.
Jamie, pull up Ultra Ego Vegeta for a second. Thanks. Okay, so let's check out the video.
It should be chat.
Is it Deficit Dogmas?
No, the MMT and Marxism video was the one I was thinking about. I don't. I mean, you could do this one too. I don't really know. I haven't watched the Deficit and Dogmas video, so I have no opinions on it.
Okay.
But I think.
What, you think you want to see this one more? Because this guy right here?
Well, the Bill Mitchell is the guy that we talked about in The Economist. Like
Yeah.
he was the economist who worked with the other guy who like came up with it.
Okay.
So so I mean I have no preference necessarily, but the reason that I'm more partial to the uh latter one is firstly because I've already seen it, so I kind of already know. I have no clue what the fuck the deficit dogma is about.
Oh, so I'm throwing you in. I'm throwing you into it then, Cam.
I mean, you can do that. That's cool.
No, it's not cool. You don't want me to do that. I guess I'm gonna watch your video. I
It's just
know.
like this guy's like one of the founders of the theory, so getting his like if this is
America's
interesting and we
awake.
find it to be a good analysis, then we could go on to the next video and that'll be like more applicable to like what's happening now with respect to Trump.
Yeah.
So we got the theory and then we'll have the praxis.
Good. Okay. Let me just make sure that is the stream. Can you check if the stream showing this properly? Hey, this guy has 2 earrings. I have an earring.
Anyway. Uh, yes.
This guy's
it is.
Australian, right?
He is.
Oh yeah. Awesome. All right, so it's working fine.
Yeah, everything's good.
Okay, let's get into it then, shall we? Let's go here. So I can actually read. No.
Awareness stops at your
No.
Craftsman.
border. America's awareness stops at your border. It's a relatively insular country. You see the world, well, you're Canadian, but Americans see the world in their own image and don't really understand the rest of the world very well at all.
Mm.
And I say to them,
Is
I
that
want
wrong?
to tax the wealthy and the rich out of existence because I want them to have less money. I don't want the government to have more money because that's stupid. The government's got as much currency as it ever wants. I want the non-government sector, the wealthy interests, the power interests in the non-government sector to have less ability to spend, less money. And the reason I want that is not to give the government more money, but to, because that's stupid, but to reduce the capacity of the wealthy and the rich corporate interests to be able to politically lobby and to be able to manipulate funds for these, you know, big donors and what do they call them in America, the PACs or something?
Mm-hmm.
Super
Uh,
PACs.
Super PACs. Yeah, I want them to have less
Yeah.
capacity to have super PACs and less capacity to manipulate the media and less, through advertising and campaign funding. That's why I want to tax the rich.
The whole idea that we need the rich's money to pay for these programs frames the situation in such a way where it obfuscates who really creates value. I mean, it frames it like, the rich people are creating all the value and we need their money to fund our things. When in
Yeah.
reality, who creates the value is the people doing the work, right?
Ab-
And like we've kind of lost sight of that.
You're listening to One Dime Radio.
Oh shit.
Become a patron at patreon.com.
Blurring, confusing our straight
Yeah, that's a pretty lit
ideology
intro.
should be classes which distort our view. And the critique of ideology should
I
be
like it.
the opposite. Like you take off
gives me very
the
90s
glasses
vibes.
so that you can finally see
This is like
the way
90s
things
hacker
really
vibes.
are.
Yeah.
Talk about a revolution.
Yeah.
Without realizing
That's sick.
that the real
That's what happens when you get into house music and EDM.
What to become.
Start jamming
One
out.
Dime Radio. Today I am here with Professor Bill Mitchell. Bill Mitchell
Hi,
is
Bill.
one of the founders of modern monetary theory, otherwise known as MMT.
So this is
He
the
founded
bozo
it
who
with
made it.
Warren Mosler. Bill
Yep.
Mitchell teaches at the University of Newcastle in Australia. And Bill Mitchell is a guest who I've been wanting to have on for a long time because you are somebody who also identifies as a Marxist and is a proponent of modern monetary theory. And this division between modern monetary theory and Marxism is something that I notice is an important division to discuss within people who espouse MMT. Because of course, at least as far as I'm aware, Warren Mosler does not really consider himself Marxist. And most MMTers I've met tend to usually be social democrats. of
Alexandria
sorts.
Ocasio-Cortez.
You adopt Marxism in your framework, which I think is very illuminating. And I heard you talk about it a lot with Steve Grumbine on Real Progressives. The obstacle I found in trying to popularize MMT, so some of the videos I've done on my main video essay channel have been sort of intros to MMT that have aimed to get people interested in the subject and explore the literature on it. A lot of the
It worked for me.
of the reaction against it has come from
What worked for you?
His videos.
Who is his? Or
Yeah, his videos that got me like interested in modern. No, the other guy. Also, I kind of have a delay because I'm watching it on the stream rather than it being streamed to me on Discord. So I might be saying shit like later than it actually happens. So,
Oh,
maybe if you
wait.
fucking streamed it to me on Discord.
Yeah, let me do that.
But yeah, so he said I made these videos or whatever, with the purpose of bringing like awareness to this idea.
Sorry, so you're talking about this guy. You watched
Talking about the
his-
other guy,
Okay,
his videos. Yeah,
got it. His camera's very blurry.
yeah. You would think he would be a little bit more.
Look, he's got this big, nice mic. This very nice office chair, nice suit, but a very blurry mic. I mean, very blurry camera. Look how crystal clear this guy is.
Yeah.
This guy's like
I could reach out and touch this guy.
this guy's 3 times his age, but look, crystal clear. Anyways,
For Marxists, actually, a lot of Marxists see it as some sort of alternative rival to it, something that might threaten the power of Marxism, if you will. But I think your perspective will be very illuminating. And the first question I would ask, which can be a bridge into the more specific questions, is being a person who adopts monetary theory and Marxism into your framework, what does it mean to be a person who espouses monetary theory and a Marxist?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. Thanks for inviting me and having me on your program. It's quite clear over the history of the literature on Marxism that there's now factions within that category.
This guy talks
If you
so
like to call it
slow.
a category. I mean, there's
he does talk pretty slow, but I think it's because he's actually really thinking about what he's saying.
Mm.
Unlike
Some of us.
unlike a large population of people today. Here's what we'll do.
Some who might be among us.
We'll speed it up.
to start with, obviously what
Okay.
I'm saying is here, it obviously depends upon what
That's
you mean
fine.
by Marxism and what you mean by a Marxist framework. And, what we know from the literature and from history is that that can mean many things. And there's been huge internecine disputes about where the limits of that concept begin and end. So let me clarify what I mean by a Marxist framework. First, I think that Marx was really the only writer in economics and politics and philosophy that he was the first really to capture the essence of what we mean by the capitalist mode of production.
True.
And we still live in a capitalist epoch.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that the one class owns the material means of production, and the other class has to negotiate with that ownership class for access to that capital and to work and to earn these income from wages that allow them to survive. And I think that the capital class doesn't have to work to eat, and the working class has to negotiate a working contract and sell their labour power to eat. We're being crude here, but that's basically it. So that's the first point, that Marx was the first person really to understand the dynamics of that system, the evolution of the change, the historical shift from feudalism. And the important difference between those systems was how the surplus value is produced and the basis on which that surplus value is expropriated. So under feudalism, the surplus value and the subsistence wage are created in different time and different spaces. So the serf would go and work for a feudal lord on their portion of land and produce all of the output that the feudal lord would expropriate. And then the serf would go off into their own little block that they'd been given, and they would produce their own subsistence food. So the surplus and the subsistence were separated in time and space, a temporal and spatial separation. Whereas with capitalism, that no longer occurred, that the subsistence wage and the surplus production were generated.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really cool analysis of it.
Yeah, so clarify that for me. I am finding it quite difficult to listen to him.
Because he's Australian or because he's talking too quickly?
No, like something about it sounds muffled to me.
Mm.
Like it sounds like he doesn't enunciate in like high range, and so my ears are like not picking it up. So you want to break this, and this is good for commentary, so we don't get copyright infringement.
Yeah. So basically, the main idea that I think that he's getting at is that under feudal structures of economic organization, when you were a serf and you had a plot of land given to you, there was a plot of land that was given to you that was specifically designed so that you would give the crops that were grown on that land to your feudal landlord, and then you had your own little portion of that land that was for the shit that you could produce for yourself. And so
You had a little garden.
Oh, yeah, you had your own little space for your family and whatever the fuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working as a feudal servant, the work that you're doing for the purpose of production for your landlord is spatially and temporally distinct from the work that you're doing to create food by your own hand,
Right.
at your own space,
Yes, it
or
was.
whatever.
Yes, it's different
And so,
work.
yeah, so the new thing about capitalism was that now when you go to work for your feudal lord or for your capitalist overlord or whatever, it's supposed to be I go to the factory for the purpose of creating cogs, and that action that I'm both producing surplus value for my boss, but also I'm producing the wage that I will then have to use to sell to get food in the future. So the act of accumulating food as a possible to the means of survival or whatever, rather than it being spatially and temporally distinct between like I'm working here to produce for my lord and I'm working here to produce my own food, that act is placed into a single spot in the factory where I'm producing both the excess for my feudal lord and producing the income that I will then use to purchase food.
I see. So you're saying that there's a you're saying that there's like a like why is that problematic?
Well, it's just a distinction in the organizing factor of like people's relationship to the means of production more generally.
Well, right.
So
But in the time of the feudal system, you would obviously grow your own grow your own food, I suppose. But are we saying then that so there were no wages obviously in a feudal system?
yeah, there were no wages. Yeah.
So the issue obviously the only thing that I think is that I think the transition had to happen because of that exchange problem between goods and services. You have a pig, I have wheat. How much is my wheat to your pig? It had to have been it had to be negotiated obviously, and it could be unfair perhaps, wouldn't. So the thing is about the currency is that the currency is a universal tool to purchase any type of good. $1 can buy anything. I mean, I'm not saying like you can afford it. I'm just saying like in general, it's an agreed upon placeholder of value. Whereas, your vegetables may not be all that in demand if everybody has their own little garden, or whatever. If you want something else, like let's say you need to get a tool, where do you go to get a tool? A blacksmith, maybe? Like, who's going to provide you?
Yeah, but here's the other thing is that we often overlook is we often anachronistically take markets to be the fundamental way that people like were exchanging goods at the time.
Well, what time are we talking about? Because I mean, it for sure was the case in like England, right? Like prior to like the American Revolution. It was markets. In Venice and Italy was markets. Like like Florence, those cities were all founded on free markets. Well, like free markets as in like little market towns and cities.
So yet again, I think that it depends on where and when you are. I think the dominant mode of production, and so like yet again, the whole point with like entering capitalism, it's like it's a fuzzy movement.
It is fuzzy.
It's the point. It's the point at which capitalism becomes the dominant mode of production, the dominant mode of relationships that individuals have to the means of production. So I think that most people, for the longest time up until the 17th century, were primarily interacting in this feudal context, and the way that they would make tools and get tools or whatever was not by going to a market and selling and buying things, but also just through like mutual aid networks of other feudal people on the same spot or whatever, or that the feudal lord would provide for the purpose of you then using it to produce more surplus for them. I just don't think that markets were as prolific as we traditionally think them to be. And of course, I think that a lot of like when the merchants came into town, when people started like really like when people started buying commodities, and of course, yet again, that was mostly reserved for like aristocracy more generally. And so like, in any case, the main point I was just trying to say is like, yeah, most people weren't working with currency in that way. They were kind of working in this more, I'm producing these things and I'm giving you some of my shit so that you can give me some of your shit. And it wasn't really like unless you were like a real merchant, like somebody who was going from India.
I mean, the time you're referring to is just much more simple. Obviously, like, I mean, try to negotiate those things in a network today with air conditioning, solar panels. Like, it's so much more complex that it had to evolve into a market basis. Is what my argument is, just saying that like it was kind of inevitable as the complexity of technology.
And that's what Marx argues.
He stole my argument.
So yeah, so that's the historical determinism that he's talking about, is that as like tools of production change, the means of production have to change, and your relationship to it has to change. And as things become more complex, you have to create new mechanisms for exchange. And so like when we started wanting to produce fucking air conditioners or whatever, or
Pretty
you know,
complicated idea. For a time.
textile mills or whatever, you couldn't teach somebody to just like, you're going to be the guy who builds all the thing, because that was just inefficient. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, you're going to be the guy who screws this thing here, and you're going to be the guy who does this here. And that's when we started creating all these more complex things, and it wasn't just, you know, food exchange as it used to be, or spices, or, you know, people, or
Now
whatever.
we have
It was,
digital components and electricity and, you know,
or more
circuit.
like steam components and stuff like that. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, just saying, like, it's evolution. Like, yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
and
good,
so
I mean, good
when
luck
that-
building a train, a steam train.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this in my
That's
one of my
pretty.
political theory classes in undergraduate. My professor told us about this book where this guy was like, I want to build a toaster from scratch. And dude, he said it's like you have to go mining for the materials, and you have to smelt it your own self, and you
Yes.
have to
Yes.
just building a fucking toaster that would
Yes.
cost like 20, like, you know,
$10
$10 or whatever.
Yeah.
Costs so much time, effort, labor, and whatever.
It's a pain in the ass
so-
for your convenience.
So yeah. And so it makes sense when we started making more complex things that we had to reorganize the way that we exchange those things and whatever. And so
It's the price we paid for convenience. You
Yeah.
have an instantaneous device that can cook your food for you, a microwave. Good luck building a fucking microwave, by the way.
oh, I can do it.
Like, that's some serious technology in there.
Yeah. So anyway, all of this is to say that like the fundamental difference, or not fundamental, but one of the big differences between feudalism and capitalism is that under feudal states, and this is what his point was or whatever, was that in a feudal economic organization or whatever, you know, your work for your boss was separated from the work that you do for yourself. And when capitalism became the main mode of production, like that became the same thing. Is like, I'm working, you know, 10 hours in the day, and 8 of those hours, and so like 8 of those hours that you're actually spending in this place that are kind of exchangeable with one another are dedicated to, like, it depends on how much your boss is extracting your labor from you.
I was
or
gonna say,
whatever.
because you could argue that you still possess your own time for your own preservation.
But now the means that you're using for the substance, a lot of it has to be dedicated to this, because you don't own, like in the feudal time, like they had this little plot of land oriented towards you. But then when they closed off the commons and you couldn't like access this stuff by yourself, and the only way to get food now was like buying it from somebody else, because, you know, I mean, of course you can buy the seeds, but if you don't have the land, that is a problem. And especially if you're in an urban setting where capitalism came into advantage in the first place, you don't have any space to grow things, and you live in these cramped little apartments or whatever. So anyway, the main idea was just that, like, yeah, the whole thing that he was saying was just like capitalism had made it that the work that you were doing for subsistence became the same type of labor that you were doing for the purpose of producing surplus value for the owner and class.
Yeah, obviously produce surplus. I mean, sure. I mean, you could argue you're also getting surplus value. It just depends how you want to measure it. I mean, what do we mean by surplus value? Are we saying only like you can derive surplus value in one context and simultaneously provide it for the capitalist in another?
So surplus value is a very technical term in Marx that has to do with the conception that so the material parts that make up this pen or whatever, they have a presumably, of course it's depends on markets or whatever, but fundamentally the parts that make this up have a quote unquote like definite value already on it. Like each of the individual components of this thing has like its own, you know, the spring is worth 3 cents, the whatever is worth this many cents, and this is whatever. So all the tools that the capitalist needs to buy to be able to make a pen in the first place, plus the tools that they use to put these things together, they have a sort of finite price, or a finite fixed price. What actually adds value to this thing is the act of putting it together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where there's this like liquid, I don't think the word he uses is liquid. Fluid maybe, I don't remember what the term was. But if you want to somehow, okay, if this is actually worth like $1.50 or whatever, like it costs $1.50 to make this, you know, and you're wanting to make a profit, say you want to make a 50% 50-cent mark, a gay cousin profit. If you want to make, you want to make a profit on this, and you want to sell it for $2, you're supposed to be adding 50 cents of value to this thing. Now, where's that 50 cents of value coming from? The argument from Marx is that the extra 50 cents of value that comes together from all the collaboration of the parts coming together is from the labor that is imbued into the object when an individual puts it together.
But that's not true because the capitalist sets the price of what he wants to sell his pen for. He could upmarket 50. He could charge that same pen $50 if it only took $1 to make. That doesn't mean the value of the pen is actually worth $50 or that your contribution to it was. He could say it's $1 million pen, and you built in $1 million pen in 5 minutes.
Well, the idea is supposed to be that there's the the quote unquote market price of these things, and so like all of these things are supposed to be measured by like.
But the thing is though is that the issue is that it's almost like an oversimplification because the market price isn't. It's not like a true value. There is no such thing as like a true market price.
Well, yeah, that's why it's supposed to be a distributional thing.
Like, yeah, for sure. For sure.
And of course the value of this pen is contingent on the prices of other pens and the scarcity of the objects that are in.
So my only claim is just to note that the value or perception of value that you're contributing to it is highly fluctuate and dependent upon the capitalist setting the terms and price of that pen in the first place. You don't like, you may build the pen, but it's not like you're selling. You're not the one who's actually selling the pen, which is also a whole different process as well.
So the whole idea is that the only reason that he is able to mark up the price is based on the fact that you have put it together in such a way, because if everybody knew, okay, the only thing that this pen cost was, okay, it costs 15 cents to do this part and 30 cents to do this part and this whatever, like we already know how much all the materials that are in the pen cost, and you wanted to, you want to make a profit, you have to say like, I've added value to it somewhere. Somewhere along the way, value was added to all these individual components coming together to make it something special, such that it now has more value than it did when I just had these individual parts. Right? Like if you want to be able to justify making a profit on it.
Yeah, it has to be obviously. Yeah, like well, the thing is though, a profit. When we say profit, people obviously just we're not talking about gay cousin Darren. Some might think that, so I want to dispel that real quick. We're not talking about Darren, but what we're talking about is net income, positive net income, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, so the claim is that you're saying is that we have positive net income only because we're selling these pens for a profit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because if you were selling
but
it
that's
for what
not
it was
true.
actually,
but that's not actually necessarily true either, though. I mean, because you could have net profit by selling the pen for less than it's worth. So it may have taken $1, let's say, to make, and then I paid you $1, but I could actually sell it for half that. I can only sell it for 50 cents, and my whole market plan could just be actually selling it so low that people buy it so much more.
Yeah, but I think the whole idea is supposed to be that you do this with the purpose of later jacking up the prices. So like the whole reason that Uber became such a successful business model, I think that there's like two different types of business models. I was recently watching a video about this, but one of them is like, yeah, you sell something at so cheap, you already have access to so many materials that like you kind of have a monopoly on it.
Mm-hmm,
but you sell something for so cheap that everybody's so dependent on you, and they just buy, and because everyone's buying from you, your competitor just falls out of the market, and you can just vertical or horizontal growth it. Or vertical growth? Yeah, vertical growth is when you buy out your competitors. No, horizontal growth is when you buy out your competitors, and vertical growth is when you buy out like other industries that are associated with your field.
Yeah, it'd be like buying the springs that made your pens, like the only spring producer.
Yeah, I'm also now the producer of springs that then...
It's so vertical integration and horizontal integration, yeah.
Yeah, and so the whole idea is supposed to be that the only actual fluctuating part of the profit of this of this pen or whatever comes from like the ability to arbitrarily determine how much labor was imbued in this process of making this thing, because we already know what the physical components are consistent of. We already know what these physical components cost on the market or whatever, and you just discern that. And this is the reason why Marx's fucking first chapter of Capital sucks so badly, is because you discern that by saying, okay, in the system of exchange, if you want to buy a coat, you have to it's worth 75 pins, and the 75 pins is equal to a mattress, and a mattress is worth to what, and so he goes through this whole process of saying how like there's this very, very complex organizational structure of like what things are equal to. And it's, if you understand like all these material objects have a set price relative to one another, such that everything is an exchange of material values, the only place where you can actually increase the profit of a thing is by imbuing it with something that's the word is variable. He uses the word variable. It's the variable fuck, I forget the term. But anyway, that's the gist of what Marx is kind of saying with this, is that all the extra value that the profit motive that you can get comes from the creation of the labor that is put into the object that allows you to say, yeah, this is actually worth 50 cents more because I'm trying to make a profit. $1.50 was from the materials, 50 cents came from the labor, and I'm paying my labor 25 cents or whatever. So I still make a 25-cent profit at the end of the day. But anyway, this is far in a field from what was actually happening on this.
Yeah.
In the same time and space, the working day. And this was, Marx talked about a wage form, the wage form in capitalism made it look as though the workers had a choice, that they could work for different capitalists. They were no longer bound to a particular manorial lord. And that gave the shimmer, the look of freedom. But in actual fact, the worker had no freedom. They had to work. They could choose which capitalist to work for, but they still had to work. And the surplus value was relatively hidden. Under feudalism, the surplus value was transparent. It was the production that was generated during the time and in the space on the lord.
Yeah, the surplus value is hidden. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, obviously, and it's very hard to determine. And that hidden nature of it also makes it hard to determine. Was it my labor that actually determined that value, or was it some other variable? But yeah, I do agree.
Yeah.
I do agree with that.
Whereas in capitalism, that became hidden. What portion of the day is subsistence value and what portion
that's just what I was saying.
Surplus value.
Yeah.
And Marx really understood those issues. And I think that that sort of conceptualization still applies today.
Sure. Yeah.
And sets up a whole set of dynamics. And so, one of the problems of the early shift to capitalist production was that it was still really in what we call the cottage industry technology. So the capitalist would go to the workers' houses and give them some equipment, spinning jenny or something. And later in the afternoon or in a week or whatever the periodicity was, they would come and collect the production and then give the worker some wages. Of course, that wasn't a very secure system for the capitalist, because the worker would soon realize that, I can just spin a bit of cotton into cloth and get enough to survive and go and enjoy life. And so, in other words, that they weren't generating the surplus value that the capitalists desired. And so the way in which the capitalist class dealt with that system was to create the factory system and to move all of the workers into so-called under the one roof. And in doing that, they could then
you have to come to the office. This is a mandatory rule that you have to be in the office, because we got to make sure you're working, because if you're at home, you may not be producing surplus value for me. I know you guys are goofing off on your phones. All right?
Taking shit on the company dollar.
Under one roof, buddy. We're bringing back the factory. Now it's a cubicle. Get ready, buddy.
Discipline the working day much more closely. And that set up a control function in capitalism, a supervisory function. So you had a class of workers that then were taken out of the
a manager? What?
Productive class into the supervisory control class. And Marx understood all of that. And that type of system pervades today. I mean, I don't know about the US, but during COVID, workers were allowed to work from home in Australia. And
they could work from here as well,
because of the restrictions imposed by governments on, to reduce the spread of infection. And of course, now that everyone thinks COVID's gone, the capitalists are now, and in the period that workers were working from home, they started to realize that this was better than going into an office or into a working place. Because for those
who wants to commute in California for like 3 fucking hours in traffic? Nobody.
Workers that could enjoy that.
What?
Somebody was in chat a second ago. I don't know if they were still here.
Oh, what did they say?
They said, "Hey, what's up?"
Oh.
Hello, Evan Smith.
If you're a real person.
That for flexibility. And now we're seeing that the
Cameron, you got to be the chat guy.
Yeah, I'll be the chat guy. Sorry, I was too distracted in our conversation.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sure they enjoyed the content more than you acknowledging them, maybe.
Oh, it was Ava Smith, not Evan Smith. Sorry.
Wow, and you.
Yeah.
Can I apologize for my co-host here? He's a reckless guy.
Come back under the one roof, because that gives them an easier system of control. So I think those insights into surplus production, into the control function, into the shimmer of the wage form, Marx was the first person to understand that. and to understand the dynamics of that in terms of the power relations between a capitalist class and a working class. And that's to me the essence of Marxism, that there is a class struggle, there is a conflict. The capitalist wants to get as much out of the working day from the worker as they can and pay as little as they possibly can. And in other words, they want to maximise surplus value and minimise the subsistence wage component of the daily production. And the workers, conversely, want to work as little as possible and get as much as possible. So they want to reduce the working day and reduce the intensity of the working day and get as much out of the working production, maximise the share for subsistence wage. And so, you've got conflicting objectives, and that conflict, in my view, defines our system and the capitalist system that we live under still in this era, and sets up all of these tensions and dynamics about income distribution, about control of the working place, about organisation and structure of the working place. And then you can extend it out into, outsourcing to other countries and all of the sort of global issues that define capitalism. So that's the sense in which I identify as being a Marxist. Do I buy all of the predictions that Marx made in Capital and theories of surplus value and other of his writings, such as, a lot of people say, Marx was wrong because we haven't seen a falling rate of profit. Well, we haven't yet, but I believe eventually we will. Have we seen another prediction, or we haven't seen the rise of subjective class consciousness among the workers and the overthrow of the state? We've seen a sort of fracturing of the working class.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of the rise of the professional managerial class, for example. It's quite different from what we used to think of the blue collar, more homogenized
Indeed, yes. These predictions have not come into fruition.
Working class. Well, we haven't. But but if you go back to those dynamics I mentioned, we've seen a massive campaign by the ruling elites who own capital to divide and conquer the working class. And part of the divide and conquer strategy was to create sort of artificial divisions based upon identity. So, we've seen...
Create artificial divisions based off identity. I couldn't have said it better myself. Interesting he brought that up. I wasn't expecting him to bring that up. But I'm really interested that he brought that up. Yeah.
The left...
I'm not going to say anything on it now, but...
on the identity issues. And so, for example, we now have progressive commentators saying, of a feminist persuasion, for example, saying, the boss who might be a boss in the working place, who might be a female boss, has more in common with the low-paid female workers in her organisation than the low-paid female workers have in their low-paid male workers who are their confreres. Now, that I don't agree with that, because that sort of suggests that the gender class is at a different or higher level than the economic class.
Indeed. The gender, it sort of creates a power dynamic between this form of identity taking precedent over the economic identification, which of course I would argue, the economic identification is surely probably higher.
I think yet again you need an intersectional analysis to say a woman's work relationship to the workplace is now also fucking, in a sense, where I think you need to have a nuanced take that this boss also kind of isn't taken as seriously as a woman by virtue of that, but at the same time she is still there are many different dynamics of oppression that are occurring at the same time.
I agree. No, I'm not saying that the oppression doesn't exist. Obviously it does. What I am saying is that what are the byproducts of that analysis? Has it encouraged awareness? It doesn't seem to have done that.
Yeah, well,
because you suggested that it would have a more positive approach if we take this intersectional, or by taking an intersectional approach, we could kind of form this better system. But the evidence hasn't shown that. The evidence has shown that has been manipulated by the capitalist class to actually take advantage of us.
I don't think that people,
which I do agree with him.
I don't think that people take an intersectional approach. I think that's the problem. Is I think that people say, let's do feminist theory. No, let's do race theory. No, let's do as opposed to intersectional theory that says that what we need to analyze is the nexuses of power, the way in which patriarchy affects working class women differently than the boss class of women or whatever. And so Serena's relationship to patriarchy is going to be significantly different than somebody in fucking South Africa or whatever. And by virtue of that type of relationship, I think that it allows you to see the nuances of these differences. Of course, at the end of the day, you should still really be concerned with as a worker, when you are interacting with your female boss, you would still have the primary thing that you should be motivated by is the thought that she's oppressing me by virtue of the fact that she's extracting my surplus value and not paying me enough. And
that's all we're saying. We're not saying that it's not important or that it's not.
But also, you shouldn't recreate fucking patriarchal structure and say that bitch did it.
I agree. No, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's not a good thing. I'm just saying, to what extent, like no one's talking about the issue that I have is that there's just zero. Similarly, you mentioned, there's no conversation of an intersectional approach. I would argue there's no conversation of a economic class approach either.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, I would also make the claim that this isn't even talking about either. I mean, at least we have some kind. The issue is that the only form of analysis we're doing is just simply, like
Race and gender.
yes, and that's the issue. Is like that's all it is, and it should, especially with how important economic analysis is. It's not talked about at all. Like, come on.
No, and I mean, I think that people do, but I think that people take a naive approach where they think that there's like top class, middle class, bottom class, as opposed to like the working class and the capital class. And I think that in creating these artificial divisions, which I mean, of course, there's the managerial class, which might be more along the lines of the middle class, but I think that like talking less about people's wages and more about like their relationship to the means of production is what is underutilized. Because a lot of people do talk about like, lower class problems, people who have to be on food stamps, people who have to uh like that type of issue, right? But people aren't talking about the fact that everybody has a certain relationship to the means of productions that is fucked.
No, for sure, for sure.
So I think there's all these issues, but that's what the essence of Marxism is to me, and that's in the way in which I identify with it.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about the relationship between MMT and why not more Marxists have adopted it into their lens and why the resistance to it. But you brought up something very interesting there that was also on my list of questions. Might as well actually tackle it before, since it's so related to your train of thought right just now. Is in your interview with Brianna Joy Gray, where you're talking about the same topic, actually, you mentioned that you believe the left essentially underwent a profound change in the 70s, where it kind of lost its touch with the working class. I'm curious.
So I just want to say, to your analysis, you blame it as a movement of the 80s with Reagan. I'm curious to see, he makes the argument that this actual left losing touch occurred prior to Reagan.
Yeah, I think he's gonna trace it back to like the May 68 protests of France. That was a real big deal, and people's concerns were less about control of the means of production and more about sexual liberation.
Once again, he has this notion brought up of identities instead of class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For you to elaborate on that, because I think it is interesting. I do see something with, for example, George McGovern being a kind of moment in politics where you have a left that is divorced from any class politics, like a visible, left in the, whether you want to say it's left or not. I mean, he presented himself that way, right? And it was a kind of professional university activist left. But I'm curious as to what you mean by, the left changing in the 70s.
Well, I mean, you have to go back a little bit earlier. And so in the 60s, there was the rise of continental Marxism, Louis Althusser and these characters. And that was married with the rise in the humanities of postmodernist structures and thinking, and the sort of rejection of modernity and the rise of postmodernist deconstruction and all of that literature and thinking that then started to emphasize more micro elements of our existence and that became identity thinking in terms of our identities and how we deconstruct ourselves back down to our basic identities. And this was the rise of feminism and emphasis on race to explain the human condition and your identity. So, for traditional Marxism, your initial identifier, if you like, was your economic class. That I still believe that I'm a member of the working class, even though I'm a professional person who's well paid in a professional occupation. As an academic, I'm still, in my view, a member of the working class because I have to go to work to earn an income, and I don't own capital, and that means that I don't own the means in which I can then employ workers to generate surplus value that I can expropriate. So these are all traditional Marxist ways of thinking. I'm still a member of the working class, even though from a sociological point of view, I'm a member of the professional managerial class. They're sort of different categorization frameworks. But the postmodernists and the continental Marxists sort of got, in my view, sidetracked into focusing on this sort of deconstruction identity type way of thinking about who we are and how we understand the world. And in my view, that was a unfortunate development. And, there's now evidence that the continental Marxists, for example, were promoted throughout the world, and particularly in America, for this particular discussion, in the sort of late 60s and early 70s. And there's now evidence, who paid for setting up these workshops and who promoted them. And we now know who did it. It was the CIA. The American CIA were running these continental Marxist workshops. And the reason they did it...
Cultural freedom, that's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah. And the reason they did it was because they realized that the Marxist scholars were losing the plot.
Would you look at that? I was not aware the Central Intelligence Agency was funding the gender identity deconstruction workshops. Look at that. It was a psyop from the beginning to divide the working class. That's actually a crazy revelation. I had no idea. I actually had no
Culture
idea of
war.
this. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you
Yeah.
probably think, oh, like this is a new form of deconstruction and analysis. This is interesting stuff. This is cool stuff. We're doing good things. Come to find out, you're just being carefully prodded along this little, like, you were always playing their game and you didn't even know.
Yeah, part of the women's liberation movement was to let them get into the workplace, which was, a big deal because it gave them, financial freedom and whatever. But it also made them more able to be workers and more able to actually
More
participate
money
in the
for the
economic.
capitalist, Cameron.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, emphasizing the black-white divide was the OG way of like keeping a large class of workers
OG.
hard.
OG.
But
Wow, but I didn't know that it stemmed all the way until or I didn't know that it extended to the point of like feminist and gender ideological analyses too.
yeah,
I always thought that was just like a far left thing that they just did on their own for their own, you know. But now it's just that's crazy to think that that whole thing was only propagated and structuralized by the CIA to divide us. That's actually a crazy claim.
well, I don't know. I don't know if it's that it was solely. I just think that because I think that there is in fact like a kernel of goodness in it or whatever. Like it's not like it was just like an entire psyop or whatever. Like of course
Well,
this
no,
is
but I
happening
mean,
during the
no, I'm not
civil
saying,
rights movement and
yeah,
things like that. And
yeah.
so like the reason that these academics began asking these questions as well is that there was a sexual liberation movement separate from these academic settings in which the CIA was propagating this information. And also obviously there was Martin Luther King was like a socialist or whatever, and like Black Panthers and all these other types of people who were like genuine radical black activists who were doing like actual, we need to recognize the distinct ways in which black people are fucked over in this country. But at the same time, first and foremost, we're workers. And that's why he had built things like the Rainbow Coalition and things like that.
But we lost
But
sight of that key part.
yeah. Yeah.
And the reason why we lost sight was because the CIA had an invested interest in doing that.
Yeah.
Do you disagree?
No, not necessarily.
Are you saying that's
think-
a
I think it's-
fictitious claim?
No, I think it's true to an extent. But I think that
I think
it's
you're.
over-exaggerated.
I think you might be latching on to the fact that the idea itself is still
I think
of good nature. It seems like.
I think what I'm primarily getting at is that there are precursors to these types of movements prior to like the CIA's involvement. I think the CIA co-opted those.
It's a
movements
co-op. No, it's a co-op for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, we acknowledge it's a co-op. That's not even being disputed.
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't start off as a co-op. It started off with good intentions of trying to understand our identity, and the CIA recognized, oh, if they can get fixated on, no offense, but like bullshit constructions of self. A lot of things are bullshit constructions of self, not just those things, but just as an example, these things. Then these people won't spend the same time building solidarity, maintaining, because we had unions who actually did shit, changed shit.
Well, then Ronald Reagan got rid of those, which is why these things are happening at very similar times.
Oh no! It just, this is great backdrop and context into how somebody like Reagan could get away with that so easily, because it was already losing steam 2 decades prior. It wasn't at its strongest in the 70s. It was already diminished. It was already weak. That's what I'm saying. Like the Reagan administration, the Heritage Foundation was just like a final nail in the coffin to put it to bed. But the movement was already dying. At least that's what it sounds like according to his analysis.
And were undermining the sort of strength of the Marxist message. And so that, it was a very good strategy of the CIA to employ to undermine what they saw as their threat. But then, of course, we had allied to all of that was the developments.
But I just want to say that's kind of frustrating that our government does that. Like, I don't know, like that's just particularly annoying. More annoying, it's sort of infuriating that we have a government who's deliberately working against us and nobody cares. And this is what I'm saying. This isn't just like a race issue. Once again, like this is a class issue.
Yeah.
And that is the problem, is that like people on the right and the left get so fixated on like, you see people on the far right who will say like, oh, like black people don't deserve reparations or this money or that money. I'm not getting anything. And so these people are bickering amongst themselves. Meanwhile, they're not acknowledging that their government is deliberately trying to keep all of them in that class.
Yeah.
And we never think, wait, hey, John, what? You and I are both getting fucked right now. We never make that distinction. Because the CIA tricks the white people into thinking they're not like the black people.
Yeah, it's the immigrants that are the problem.
Yeah,
it's
and so they trick the
Trans
white.
people
So
are
the
the
white
problem.
people also, their situation never gets better either, because they're just perpetually left in the state of like, well, I'm not that. At least I'm not that. But at the end of the day, you still are. you're still the working class. That's so annoying, bro. That's so
The
annoying.
Economics Academy and the rise of monetarism.
I just can't believe it. I just can't believe this shit goes on. But anyways,
the early 70s. And really the
I'm sorry.
broad attack on what had been the Keynesian consensus, the role of the state in the economy was to mediate business cycle fluctuations to ensure that there was high levels of employment. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to understand that in the early 70s, capital was contriving a strategy to undermine the distributional impacts of the social democratic era after the Second World War. So what we understand and know is that after the Second World War, the governments around the world took on a role to nation build and to reduce inequality and to provide widespread public services in education, transport, health, utilities, and those things, and also to set about a solid redistributive agenda to reduce inequality. And there was such a strong groundswell among the citizenry around the world for that agenda that for a time the state was quite powerful. And even though the interests of capital didn't like that policy agenda, they really couldn't do much about it because there was so much groundswell in voting support for social democratic policies. Now, by the end of the 60s, trade unions become quite powerful around the world, and capital was really pissed off about that because they realised that forced them to share the income distribution in a more equal way. And so by the end of the 60s, capital was trying to work out ways in which they could regain distributional power. And in the US, for example, in 1971, we saw the release of the Powell Manifesto. And the Powell Manifesto was written by Lewis Powell under contract to the US Chamber of Commerce, I believe. And this outlined a broad strategy, including the development of think tanks, which would hold themselves out as independent research centers and research bodies, but were really funded by the big industrialists and the big interests of financial capital to become highly sophisticated propaganda and marketing arms.
Wow.
Yeah, this is the Powell.
This is stuff I don't know about, by the way. This is stuff.
Yeah, this is the Powell memo. This is the thing I was talking about with respect to like Reagan or whatever. Like it's a big deal. Like this is the beginning of the neoliberal era.
Wow. Hold on a second. I'll write this down in my notes. If you don't mind.
I mind.
So, wow. Wow. Dude, this is a good video.
And these are the people, and these are the people who are like still upholding like people like Ben Shapiro and stuff like that. The same people are still like paying people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and like all these other like right-wing people are like being funded by the same foundations that were created under the Powell Manifesto.
I kind of want to read this Power Manifesto.
It's Powell. This is a miss.
Oh, it's
quote.
Powell?
Like the name
Like
Powell. Like Mr. Powell.
Oh, so it's the Powell Manifesto.
Yeah.
I thought it was Power. I was like, Power, that's an interesting name. Mr.
No, that'd be a little too on the nose.
The Mr. Powell Manifesto.
Yeah.
With the release of the Powell Manifesto. And the Powell Manifesto was written by Lewis Powell under contract to the US Chamber of Commerce, I believe.
Mr. Powell.
Mr. Powell was under.
And a broad strategy, including the development of think tanks, which would hold themselves out as independent research centers and research bodies, but were really funded by the big industrialists and the big interests of financial capital to become highly sophisticated propaganda and marketing arms.
Propaganda.
Highly sophisticated propaganda. Wow. Very interesting.
And so they started to pump out all this stuff, anti-state stuff. And the Powell Manifesto also recommended the development of a pro-capital media. And so you started to see the development of what we now see as Fox News.
Fox
in America,
News.
these really extreme right propaganda type media organizations that parade as news organizations, which are really just propaganda arms. And also, Powell also said that capital should start infiltrating the education systems and to manipulate curriculum that's and bestow endowments on universities under conditions of influencing curriculum. So there was a huge.
Wow. Wow. These motherfuckers got greedy, huh?
Yeah. It's insane.
I never knew this. This is.
I wish I knew.
I wish I knew. I was being so. The CIA was deliberately dividing the working class from the capitalist class. And all these things that I'm watching on the news are complete psyop and bullshit. Well, now you can't even blame the Fox News and CNN enthusiasts. They've been psychologically operated on by sophisticated propaganda arms. I mean, these poor people are victims.
Like, yet again, that's what I'm saying. Is like I never really blame the people, the fascists or whatever, because it's a lot of the time it's like the systems of capital that flow that necessitate these kinds of things to happen. I don't even blame like the people in the CIA necessarily who like came up with this shit,
I
because
do.
like because what really at the end of the day is
Are you a
happening is like
plant? Wait a minute.
I think fundamentally the systems of power are designed to maintain themselves. And I think if you're a capitalist who's attempting to maximize profit no matter the cost, you're going to buy out the government and you're going to pay the CIA to like, or put people in power who have your best interest in heart because you're trying to maximize shareholder value and maximize the return on investment. And like, it's just like you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to do that. Why would you like, it's not like these individuals are like, they're kind of just like following the logic of the game that they've been put in. If they didn't do it, somebody else would.
That's a bad assumption.
Because it's just true because that's the rules of the game.
No, buddy, we don't have to play by the rules of the game.
Well, if you don't play by the rules of the game, you lose. And somebody else will have to
No,
win.
Cameron, that's not true. Okay. See, I think what happened is simply that people believed that their government was for them. And that was the mistake, I think, is that people trusted their government and didn't question. Like, for example, the CIA, even though we know the CIA has literally done things to, like, destroy the African American. Like, it's not like this is new. I mean, AIDS, what was it, syphilis they were giving to the African American people? Like, dude, or, I know it's not proper to say African American, but, like, the black people. Like,
Yeah.
dude, come on, man. Like, I think moving forward, if you ever want to have a collective class conscious, you have to be completely aware that anything you're watching or anything that you are watching or seeing could be a result of some kind of. You almost have to be paranoid, I think.
No, I mean, yes, that's a big deal.
You almost have to be paranoid because it's like the system is literally trying to work against you, and there are powerful forces at play, millions of dollars that are kind of like how I said with the smartphones and stuff. I believe those are also psyops. I believe these social media apps are psyops. I believe like a lot of these things are also psyops. But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting.
Huge fight back going on in the early 70s. And in the economic sphere, that was reinforced by monetarism and all of that stuff. And what we saw around that time, the early 70s, was also the crisis of the OPEC oil crisis, where oil-dependent nations suddenly had a doubling of oil prices, which caused an inflationary outbreak. And so put all that together and you have a dialogue emerging where the right are pumping out all this stuff saying, look, we've got a fiscal crisis in the state. The governments can no longer fund all of these welfare programs and fund full employment. We've got to allow the market to do that, to restore its role in resource allocation. And at the same time, we had an opening of the global economy with global finance. And the Bretton Woods system collapsed in August 71 when President Nixon abandoned the gold standard effectively. And exchange rates started to were floating mostly, except for Europe. And so, the right were pumping out all this stuff. Well, look, these fiscal deficits are unsustainable. The financial markets will kill currencies because they don't no longer trust governments with all of this public debt. And we have to change our paradigm and start reducing deficits and all of that. Now, the left, there was a book in 1973 by James O'Connor, The Fiscal Crisis of the State, which was just eating up all of this right-wing propaganda. And the left started to believe it, that the fiscal crisis of the state and all of that. Now, the left, there was a book in 1973 by James O'Connor, The Fiscal Crisis of the State, which was just eating up all of this right-wing propaganda. And the left started to believe it. And in the book I wrote with Thomas Fartsy in 2017, Reclaiming the State, we traced this demise of the left.
That's crazy.
Hmm?
Thomas Fartsy. Crazy name.
In the book I wrote with Thomas Fartsy in 2017, Reclaiming the State.
I might read that book. Let me see. Get out of that.
Jamie, write that down.
Jamie, write that down. What? Can't you just type it on a Word document?
No. But thanks for asking. I have a fidget plier.
What is that? What the hell's a fidget plier?
It's just a plier, but I use it like a fidget toy.
Oh, I was like, is this some kind of like new invention?
We traced this demise of the left into believing all of this right-wing rubbish about the state will run out of money, that the
Rubbish.
financial markets, global financial markets will kill currencies. And the upshot of all of that, so the right knew all along that the governments couldn't run out of currency, couldn't run out of the currency that they introduced. But they sold that to the public as a very powerful fear campaign. And as a consequence, that gave the right much more political sway. And they set about reconfiguring the state. So the state hadn't gone away. It wasn't powerless. The right knew that. The left bought the fact that the state was now powerless against the powers of global finance. And the right knew damn well that was just fiction, but used it in a very strategic way to reconfigure the state so that the state would introduce legislation and regulative structures that reinforce the agenda of the elites. And so we saw the privatisations occurring, outsourcing, user pay systems, the sell-off of the public enterprises around the world. And all of what we now refer to as the neoliberal agenda came through the reconfiguration of the state.
As
And
the
meanwhile,
lib agenda.
back at the ranch, the left had given up the macroeconomic debate and ceded that to the right. So now there's homogeneity in that debate. There's no contest. And the left became completely diverted into identity studies. And that was the demise of the left, in my view. And that persists today.
There was also like an ignorance by the left of economics.
Mm-hmm. Some of us.
Well, clearly a lot of us.
Clearly. But let's not talk about that. Don't want to hurt anybody's feelings here.
That's a very compelling way to put it all together in a succinct way. I mean, it's a complex story, of course. But when it comes to the neoliberal turn, a lot of Marxists sometimes criticize Keynesians and often, by extension, MMT, because they tend to assume that MMT is just...
Okay, hold on. I have to pee really quick. Cameron, keep the stream entertained. Play that funky music, Cameron.
Yeah.
Chat, today we're going to see Brandon get converted into a leftist live on stream. Change the stream title.
Whoa, I have Pokemon? What the fuck? Hello? Why do I have a fucking Empoleon here, bro? Oh. Hey. It's me. That guy. I didn't realize how dark I was. Now I'm light. Don't really got too much to say at the moment. But I do want to kind of clarify my commentary on Marxism. So I'm going to look up some terms and try to define a little bit more clearly where we were with respect to that. So, Marxism for dummies. Let's do it. Okay. So, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were German revolutionary philosophers who wrote the blah blah blah. They blame. Okay, what is Marxism? In order to understand Marxism, one must first understand what capitalism is. Capitalism is an economic system in which the means of production are privately owned and goods or services are produced for the profit in a free market. In a free market, people are free to use and sell their private property without government interference. Marxism refers to the political and economic theories. Okay. Marx's theories revolved around human history. He believed that history was largely determined by the struggle between the ruling classes and the oppressed classes, which are conflicting interests. Marx believed that if workers could overthrow capitalism, they would be able to build a socialist society. This society would still contain social classes, but for the first time in human history, the ruling class would be the majority of the population. How does capitalism work? Capitalism relies on the voluntary exchange of labor in return for wages or capital. This is a mutual beneficial agreement. Individuals pursue their own self-interest. In a sense, capitalism is based on greed and self-interest. Okay. People who support the idea of capitalism are known as capitalists. The capitalists believe that government should not interfere in the economy and should regulate economic practice instead. The free market will distribute goods to people in a more efficient and cheap way. Language, scientific knowledge, and law all grew out of the free exchange of voluntary production. The beginning of capitalism began during the feudal system. The feudal system, as lords owned the land, they relied on force to guarantee that they were provided with food. As they were not producing food to sell on the market, there was no competitive pressure to innovate production. Lords spent all their wealth on military equipment or lavish consumption, and they therefore had no incentive to invest in the developing new productive technologies. The result of the feudal system actually prevented capitalism from growing. The feudal manor, the village area, was self-sufficient, which limited the growth of the free market. There were also three other stages of capitalism, and these were mercantilism, industrial capital, and modern capitalism. Marxist solution. Socialism is a class of ideologies favoring an economic... Hello? Are you back? I was reading Marxism for Dummies.
Oh, did somebody
Um,
ask for it, or you just felt?
No, I was just trying to see if I could clarify what I was talking about with respect to the surplus value and stuff like that. But this is not about Marx's economic stuff, but more about dialectical materialism, I think.
Yeah, we could benefit from a lot of clarification from you. I completely agree. Let's continue clarifying.
Yeah, well, maybe if you read the book yourself, you'd clarify your damn self.
Yeah, I'll read it when you read it, buddy. Cover to cover.
Dude, try reading the first chapter. It's
I'm
like
aware
some
of what I know what it looks like. I've seen some of the paragraph. Like I've skimmed like paragraphs. Like I know that book is it's literally quite painful to read. Like you talk about
it's some of the worst thing I've ever read
you
in my
talk
life.
about geometric method of analyzing philosophy being annoying. No. How about Das Kapital being a fucking poorly written book?
No, I mean, because the point of it is not to radicalize people. It's like a literal economic treatise. It's like reading a fucking economics book and like, oh yeah, that's cool. I love economics. Like you don't read an economics book for fun. You don't read a fucking Wealth of Nations and be like, oh yeah, he fucking ate.
Depends where you are on the autism scale.
True.
I have met people who do enjoy that kind of stuff.
No, I mean that's cool. I mean, I enjoy stupid shit like fucking whatever, but like
Stupid
I don't
shit.
know. It's
Stupid
really
shit
hard.
like fucking
The Critique of Pure Reason.
like cut.
Like I genuinely think the Critique of Pure Reason is my favorite book at this point. But anyway, yeah. No, dude, you can't start a book with. It's like in the Bible when it's like and Jonah was descended from George, and George was descended from Bill, and Bill was descended from, and it's like,
yeah, those chapters are like abysmally painful to really raw dog your way through them. I mean, but see, they're kind of, I don't want to say irrelevant. I don't know what they provide.
Yeah, I'm sure the genealogies have some sort of literary significance.
I just don't know what that. I just don't know what that would be.
Yeah, perhaps in the context in which it was written, it made more sense. And
For
I think
sure,
that, like,
for sure, in the context, thousands of years ago, I'm sure it made more sense.
Framing game. But I think that, like, yeah, and I don't know how central the first chapter of Capital really is in terms of like just understanding the basics of economy or whatever, like the value of exchange or whatever. Okay, sure, whatever.
Right.
I think the more interesting stuff is when he gets into like what is in fact surplus value and how, how does surplus value come into existence and whatever. So, and that's in like chapter 5 or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, so far in this video, a lot of interesting ideas, which I'm obviously gonna have to independently research.
chew on
Huh?
like a cow. Chew on like a
Yeah,
cow.
I'm gonna have to chew on and really look into. No, I'm not. So I'd say for my own position, I'm not completely. So on the economics question, I don't have any stance. Because this would be an economics discussion that would require like an actual economic analysis.
Which part?
Well, like just about MS. Was it MM?
Oh, MMT. Oh, we haven't even gotten to that yet. He
No,
hasn't
I
even
know.
fucking explained what
I
MMT
know.
is.
And I just want to clarify, like at this point, just for the video's sake, when I'm going back, we haven't got into that. That is still in the air. We're going to get into economics. Right now, we're just talking about the history, some potential psyops from the CIA, propaganda, think tanks funded by Koch brothers and other various billionaires. We also have people like Warren Buffett today who even say the tax structure is fucked up. So it's not like this is the craziest idea, but we're gonna get into it, and this is the fun part of researching because you get to learn, and who doesn't like learning except your
I love learning.
except your friends Brad and Cam. Okay, with that being said, let us resume. Let us resume.
Just another arm of Keynesianism. They sometimes use neo-Keynesianism and MMT interchangeably when talking about it, but they say that the neoliberal turn to frame it as a political choice, right? To frame austerity as a political choice would miss the characteristics of the capitalist economy that would have led to something like that happening anyway, with the falling rates of profit, which would compel capital to want to get rid of its obstacles, being labor, right? Labor, of course, ensured that the workers had a greater share of the economic pie, and only naturally, as profit rates would go down, it's natural the capitalists would want to, pretty much like eat up a larger slice of the profits at the expense of the worker. So they would say that, this is something that was going to happen in capitalism anyway. I'm curious how you would respond to that as someone who, adopts Marxism in your Marxist analysis of class conflict in your framework.
Yeah, look, MMT is not Keynesian thinking at all, or new Keynesian, so we'll come back to that later. But, I tried to summarize a whole range of complex things in a short period. It took 500 pages in our book, Reclaiming the State.
Wow.
But,
This is going to be a fun read when I get it.
But you're absolutely correct that by the end of the 60s, the capitalists were well and truly fed up with social democracy. And as I said, they created a very sophisticated framework and strategy and institutional structure through think tanks and through infiltrating the education system, through taking control over key media institutions. They created a very powerful propaganda machine. And as I said, the CIA promoted continental Marxism because they knew that it was a total diversion away from the concept of class struggle and capital-labor conflict into all this deconstruction and identity. And, postmodernists wandering around deconstructing reality. That was perfect for the interests of capital because it completely diverted attention that historically had been focused on.
Yeah, you're too busy deconstructing reality that you don't even actually end up changing your own reality.
Relations and capital-labor conflict issues in the workplace. So, perfect diversion. And so I think that the challenge to capitalism of social democracy and the governments around the world that were reducing income inequality and providing much more public space and reducing the reliance of the working class on having to work in onerous conditions. So all of the occupational and health and safety legislation that came in during that era. There were equal pay movements that were sponsored by governments to reduce gender inequalities and therefore reduce the ability to divide and conquer on gender. All of these developments were the anathema of the interests of capital. And so they were very strategic. The divide and you can't underestimate the power of their divide and conquer sort of strategy. That was reinforced with a nomenclature. So when the OPEC oil crisis occurred began in October 1973, but the government's response to that was to the inflation was to create unemployment, to cut back spending. Well, we had a whole propaganda machine and look at the unemployed. They're lazy. They don't deserve income support, which was traditionally provided under social democratic
people like Milton Friedman
rules. And we started to see divisions occurring there. Oh, look, those lazy unemployed, those welfare cheats. And in Australia we called them dole bludgers. I'm not sure what they were called in the US, but I forgot.
Dole bludgers.
But, this divide and conquer language emerged, so that we saw in Australia school kids that shouting at unemployed workers during the day, "You lazy bastards, go to work." And so it was definitely strategic.
You lazy bastards.
And it remains so today. So neoliberalism was an inevitable outcome of that shift back in power and recapture of power by the capitalists. And that's the nature of capitalism. They want to defend their hedge. That's reality. It's not all beer and Skittles. It's a system that has a strong incentive to maintain the ability to accumulate capital.
That's where I find your analysis very illuminating, because the criticism people sometimes give to MMT is that it lacks that class analysis and that Keynesians sometimes also don't pay attention to that conflict. And from what I've gathered from what you advocate in Reclaiming the State, is you sort of advocate for a democratic socialism. Now, some Marxists will want to be hella orthodox and say, well, you need a vanguard party and revolution. But what I'd say those types for now is just, regardless of how you get there, there's going to be an intermediary transition between capitalism and socialism that will involve a mixed economy, right? And the pitch I give to them is, if you want a program that is best for the majority of people, best for the working class, how are you going to do that by telling them you're going to raise taxes, right? And this is an obstacle I found that's huge and annoying, because I've tried to even talk to officials in the New Democratic Party in Canada, because I'm based in Canada, which is our NDP is our sort of labor party, if you will. Yeah. And oh my God, they think in the dinosaur age, they all think that you need taxes to fund everything. And, they all say, oh, we're going to fund it by taxing the rich, but the numbers don't quite add up with that. And then workers end up suspecting them, thinking, well, you're going to raise taxes on me, aren't you? You're going to raise taxes on me. And, maybe explain that, because I'm not going to ask you to explain all of MMT, because we've already done episodes on the show doing all of that. You don't need to do all that. But I mean, what is the MMT position on taxes and taxation? Because I think that is one of the most important things.
Well, look, the first thing to think about is that to really understand what MMT is, and I'm not going to go in, as you say, to all the principles of it, but the broad understanding. So a lot of people on the right say, oh, we'd hate to have MMT. And a lot of people on the left say, oh, we'd love to have MMT dominating policy. And of course, both are incorrect. Both concepts suggest that MMT is some sort of regime that you switch to or switch away from depending on your preferences. And even a lot of the people who now would in the activist community that think of themselves as MMT proponents get this wrong. And the important point is that MMT isn't a regime. It's not a set of policies. It's a lens. So I've got my glasses on here because I can see the screen better as I've got older. And the lens allows me to see reality more clearly. And MMT as a lens allows us to see through the fictions into the monetary system and to understand more clearly the dynamics of that system, to understand that the capacities of the currency issuing governments within that system, to understand the consequences of using those capacities in one way or another. So it's a framework for understanding. Now, then you say, okay, well, is it left or right? Well, it's neither. It's a lens. It's relatively agnostic about left and right. Now, a confusion out there is because a number of MMT proponents are notionally on the left, although I dispute that sometimes, but certainly I'm on the left. As one of the founders, I'm on the left. What does that mean? Well, I have a left value system. Now, importantly then, well, when I say MMT as a lens is neither left nor right, how do you have any policies that are informed by MMT? Well, to have an MMT informed policy set, you have to impose an ideology or a set of values on your understanding. So there's a clear difference in my view between the system of understanding and how you translate that system of understanding into policy space, into action. And that requires us to impose a set of values, an ideology. Now, then you can talk left and right, because my set of values are on what I identify as being on the left, which means that I believe in public space, in equality, in reducing inequality, in the role of government in our lives to act as our agent, to provide things that we can't provide for ourselves, provide them on a societal basis, like public education, public transport, public health, publicly run utilities, all of this stuff, environmental care, so Department of Environment, and all of those things. Whereas a person who has values on the right, who believes in individual rather than collective will, who believes in market-determined outcomes, would still have exactly the same understanding of MMT as I have, same lens, but has a different value set, so applies that understanding in a different way. So for example, they will have private education as a principle rather than public education. And then they'll understand the consequences of it, that the poor, low-income families may not be able to access that private education adequately, or that they'll be screwed if we have a predominantly private healthcare system. But they accept that because their values are that inequality is okay. That's for a right-leaning person, inequality provides incentives, trickle down, incentives for the poor to work harder and all of that nonsense. But that's value statements. So that's the first important point that a lot of people get wrong about MMT. Now, think about taxes. The other night I gave a talk in Newcastle, Australia, which was hosting the largest climate activist event in Australian history. And Newcastle was the largest coal export port in the world. So it's where I work in Newcastle. It's the largest coal export port in the world. There's massive amounts of coal shipments coming out from the upper Hunter Valley area in New South Wales, Australia. And this activist campaign has what they call the People's Blockade. So the People's Blockade is a flotilla of small boats and kayaks and surfboards that go out into the shipping channel of the port and attempt to stop the coal ships going in and out as a climate activist campaign. So it's really a fabulous event. But the problem is, the organisers, which are called Rising Tide, the rising tide of humanity against fossil fuel companies, the Rising Tide, one of their key strategies and key policies is that the federal government in Australia should tax the coal firms 70% along the lines of the Norwegian tax on fossil fuel producers. And the way they frame that is to say, if we tax all of those fossil fuel companies 70%, the government will have the money to then introduce just transition schemes away from dependence on fossil fuels. Now, my talk was that they are mad. That policy is actually undermining their strategy, because ask yourself a simple question. If the government doesn't introduce a 70% tax on fossil fuel corporations on their profits, a la Norway, does that mean then, logically, that the government can't afford to provide just transition and climate mitigation strategies? Well, logically, according to Rising Tide and all of these progressive activists, yes, that's what it means. If they can't tax, they can't spend. And so I think by adopting that mainstream neoliberal framing, that the federal government is financially constrained and therefore has to seek revenue from the non-government sector. And what better source of that revenue than to tax these evil fossil fuel companies? Well, then once you're framing it like that, you're dead. You can't achieve what's required, because to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, we're going to need much more spending than we can possibly get by taxing 70% of the coal companies. It's just the quantum's not there. But moreover, what an MMT understanding teaches us is that we don't need that tax revenue at all. That the governments don't spend tax revenue because the government issues its own currency. And the taxes logically come from the government spending that currency to produce income in the economy that allows us then to pay the taxes. So then the question is, the progressives then turn on me and say, so you don't want to tax the rich, obviously. And I say to them, no, I want to tax the wealthy and the rich out of existence, because I want them to have less money. I don't want the government to have more money, because that's stupid. The government's got as much currency as it ever wants.
Stupid.
I want the non-government sector, the wealthy interests, the power interests in the non-government sector to have less ability to spend, less money. And the reason I want that is not to give the government more money, but to, because that's stupid, but to reduce the capacity of the wealthy and the rich corporate interests to be able to politically lobby and to be able to manipulate.
Ah, now this is an idea.
It's an idea.
Now this is an idea, Cameron.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yes. Yes, it doesn't make sense to tax the rich.
Well, it makes sense to tax the rich,
No.
but just not for the reasons that people say that we should.
No.
That's the claim he's making.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. That's the claim he's making.
No.
He said we don't tax the rich because it's stupid, or it's stupid to think we have to tax the rich so that we have money to pay for our expenditures.
Yes, because
The reason-
we could just print the money.
Yeah, the reason we tax the rich is so that they're corporately, so that they don't have the monetary funds to start paying for super PACs and to manipulate the media and to fund the government and to be like CIA fucking operatives or whatever. Like the reason that we're taxing the rich, according to him, is so that they have less power.
No,
with respect to
I mean, we'll go back. I think we need to go back. I thought his entire claim was that it doesn't make sense to tax the rich because you taxing their profits doesn't fund the government. Doesn't actually fund.
That's not what he's saying.
Let's go back.
To reduce that you're dead, that revenue, thinking that these progressive climate a 70% tax on you know, just transition schemes away from will produce government in Australia company, which are called Riders Campaign of the blockade is a flotilla of small boats and kayaks and surfboards that go out into the shipping channel of the port and attempt to stop the coal ships going in and out as a climate activist campaign. So it's really a fabulous event. But the problem is, the organisers, which are called Rising Tide, the rising tide of humanity against fossil fuel companies. The Rising Tide, one of their key strategies and key policies is that the federal government in Australia should tax the coal firm.
One of their policies is that the federal government should tax the coal firm 70%. Okay, remember that. That's their policy. He's referring to the movement.
70% along the lines of the Norwegian tax on fossil fuel producers. And the way they frame that is to say, if we tax all of those fossil fuel companies 70%, the government will have the money to then introduce just transition schemes away from the...
He's saying if they tax them, then the government will have more money to actually make the transitions. He's going to tell them they're stupid for thinking that.
Dependence on
They
fossil
are
fuels.
stupid for thinking that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we agree.
My talk was that they are mad. That policy is actually undermining their strategy because...
The policy is undermining the strategy. Okay, why?
Ask yourself a simple question. If the government doesn't introduce a 70% tax on fossil fuel corporations on their profits, a la Norway, does that mean then, logically, that the government can't afford to provide just transition and climate mitigation strategies? Well, logically, according to Rising Tide and all of these progressive activists, yes, that's what it means. If they can't tax, they can't spend. And so I think in that, by adopting that mainstream neoliberal framing, that...
Oh, wait, hold on.
If they can't... strategies. Well, logically, according to Rising Tide and all of these progressive activists, yes, that's what it means. If they can't tax, they can't spend.
If they can't tax, they can't spend.
So what he is criticizing right now...
he's criticizing that people think falsely that if the government doesn't tax, then there's no money for them to actually spend.
Yeah, so they're saying that like you need to increase these taxes, or we're not going to have the money to actually do these climate mitigating strategies or whatever. So we're taxing these people with the purpose of accruing wealth such that we have expenditures that are to pay off our expenditures on climate mitigation strategies. But he's saying that they're wrong to do that because that's not how the money is printed. That's not how money comes into existence for the government.
Yeah, you don't need revenue from taxes.
Money. Yeah, you don't need money from taxes. But he's going to then go on to say that the reason we tax the rich is not so that we can get the money to perform these strategies. We can just do these strategies regardless.
Yeah,
the reason that we tax the rich, we should still tax the rich.
So they don't have, they have a smaller pie.
Yeah, so they have a smaller piece of the pie, so they can't fucking buy out our politicians.
Yeah,
they can't buy out the media, and that's what he's saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I think in that, by adopting that mainstream neoliberal framing, that the federal government is financially constrained and therefore has to seek revenue from the non-government sector. And what better source of that revenue than to tax these evil fossil fuel companies. Well, then once you're framing it like that, you're dead. You can't achieve what's required, because to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, we're going to need much more spending than we can possibly get by taxing 70% of the coal companies. It's just the quantum's not there. But moreover, we obviously, what an MMT understanding teaches us is that we don't need that tax revenue at all. That
We don't need the tax revenue at all, right?
governments don't spend tax revenue because the government issues its own currency. And the taxes logically come from the government spending that currency to produce income in the economy that allows us then to pay the taxes. So then the question is, the progressives then turn on me and say, so you don't want to tax the rich, obviously. And I say to them, no, I want to tax the wealthy and the rich out of existence, because I want them to have less money. I don't want the government to have more money, because that's stupid. The government's got as much currency as it ever wants. I want the non-government sector, the wealthy interests, the power interests in the non-government sector, to have less ability to spend, less money. And the reason I want that is not to give the government more money, but because that's stupid, but to reduce the capacity of the wealthy and the rich corporate interests to be able to politically lobby and to be able to manipulate funds through these, big donors, and what do they call them in America, the PACs or something?
Super PACs.
Super PACs, yeah. I want them to have less capacity to have super PACs, and less capacity to manipulate the media, and less, through.
Okay, yeah. So he was only saying the framing of the taxation is what's the issue. Yeah. So he still says we should tax the rich, but don't falsely believe that you are dependent on the rich.
Yeah, you're not dependent on the rich for the ability for us to pay our expenditures.
And
in
this is
healthcare
what
or
will
whatever
obviously
else.
be disputed by like other economists. Like this is something we'll get into. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, his claim is that I'm just writing it down for my own record. I mean, that makes sense though, because yeah, the Federal Reserve is what prints all the money.
Mhm.
And so I guess it
Now,
is.
of course,
Yeah, what? Go ahead.
this is not supposed to be like a universal theory, and I think that. So I was talking to Serena's mom about this because obviously she's an economist,
What'd she say?
and she said that she thinks that it is an okay model for countries like the United States or for China or for Canada or whatever, but that is this model is not accurate when you try to go to other countries like Turkey or Greece, or well, I guess Greece is part of the EU, but you know Egypt or whatever, like economies that don't have that type of fiat currency, that don't have strong trust in their institutions or whatever. This type of economy doesn't work, and that this type of model is actually very inaccurate. And
Yeah,
so
that would be very
it's
dangerous.
so it's a very constrained model. So I think that like she said that it's okay with respect to like certain places, but like the reason that people traditionally stick with the mainstream model is because it generalizes more over all of these different countries. So at least that was my impression of what she had said. But
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just curious. What are the effects of the government? Like take the example of like switching from carbon emissions to carbon neutral emissions or eco-friendly emissions. Like he like his whole argument was that yes, we would have to. It would require spending a tremendous more amount of money to actually make that transition process. Now I'm curious: is what does that spending do to the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you have the materials, it just directs where the resources are going. Like the issue with like
Because like the value of a currency, I'd imagine, or I think it's true, is that it is dependent on sort of like the amount that's in circulation and not in circulation and so forth.
mhm.
Now, obviously, it's complicated because this is a fiat currency, and so there's a lot more variables that kind of determine. Whereas when we had like a gold standard, it was much more objectively clear what a value of something was because you could just measure it to a direct benchmark. It was very simple.
Yeah.
I
But
myself don't even fully understand fiat currencies and how in the myriad of ways that it derives like a value. Because it gets complicated. Like exchange rates can float, you can peg them. Like it's all like, it all seems very whimsical. And maybe that's the point, is that it is so whimsical that something like MMT would work, because we can already whimsically do whatever we want to manipulate the currency. MMT
Yeah,
is
so
just
I think-
another lens of manipulating it to where like, okay, yeah, just print more. You could change something else to control whatever negative variables are. I mean, obviously we're gonna have to see what it does and stuff, and what the effects of that are in regards to fiat currency. But
Yeah, I think the fundamental idea is that like you won't actually end up in a big problem with a deficit as long as you're producing the things that you aim to produce and are reinvesting in not in the currency, but reinvesting in the production that the currency is supposed to be directing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
through advertising and campaign funding. That's why I want to tax the rich. I don't want to tax them to give the government more money, because that's really a reflection of your ignorance on the capacities of your national governments. So I think that's the MMT position. No, I should qualify that. That's not the MMT position. The MMT position is the government does not need taxes in order to spend. The left position, reflecting my values, is we want to tax the rich and the wealthy out of existence to stop them being able to manipulate and use political power to manipulate the system to get more for themselves and less for workers.
To your point, is the whole idea that we need the rich's money to pay for these programs frames the situation in such a way where it obfuscates who really creates value. I mean, it frames it like, the rich people are creating all the value and we need their money to fund our things. When in reality, who creates the value is the people doing the work, right? And like we've kind of lost sight of that, and how that money to function in such a way where it for workers. To your point, is the whole idea that we need the rich's money to pay for these programs frames the situation in such a way where it obfuscates who really creates value. I mean, it frames it like, the rich people are creating all the value and we need their money to fund our things. When in reality, who creates the value is the people doing the work, right? And like we've kind of lost sight of that, and how that Marxist insight is very much, it very much coincides.
Well, I mean, okay. Creating value, who or what creates value? I mean, remember how yesterday we were talking about structures?
Mm-hmm.
Capitalists do provide a structure to create value, and an organized structure. And we do know, now obviously that's not the only way to do it. It isn't a like traditional conception of like a CEO top-down capitalist structure, but capitalists do or have provided a structure that does produce value. So it's not to say that it's solely the worker providing value, because it's the cohesion of the two together that provide the value. Because the worker without an organized structure in place is no worker.
yes, but the fundamental idea of Marxism or whatever is that it's not supposed to be that we don't need organization. That organization plays a central role, and why capitalism is a leg up over things like feudalism and slavery is that you do have this new level of organization that wasn't present in the prior organizational structures. But the whole point is supposed to be that we can self-organize, and rather than having a dictator at the top of this hierarchy in the way that we currently have it, like the value of the organization is good, but it's not that the singular capitalist is creating that value. It's the organization itself that is, and that organization becomes self-reflective and self-governing, and that would be a better system insofar as it reduces this inherent.
I agree
tension
with that.
between
No, I agree with
the
that.
working class and the capital class.
No,
So,
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, like it doesn't have, and that's why I said like it doesn't have to be like one capitalist at top and everyone else at bottom, or whatever, or like 5 people at top and like 500 people at bottom, or whatever it is. Like, I think that's a good point. Obviously, because you've talked about that, co-ops,
yeah.
and stuff like that, and it is a very feasible structure, and it is much more fair and democratic and so forth, and these we could say are good things, and I agree. Of course, I guess the issue just becomes down the road is simply like these people actually doing it and creating tons of like this becoming a popular conception of business, but
with a project that is aware of how of how modern money works. Another thing too is like when it comes to inequality, I mean, a lot of governments historically have dealt with inequality not just through taxation of the rich, but like through land reform or redistribution of resources or setting a cap on how much property one is allowed to own. There's all kinds of ways. It's not just the nominal level, right? There's multiple layers. But I think the reason why people are so tied on the left to taxation as a means to one, deal with inequality, but also to mainly like fund things. That's why they think in this way, I think, because of the Nordic model is often what the left wants to model itself off of. like Norway, Denmark, Sweden. And I'm curious, this is a question I've been wanting to ask like an MMT economist for a while, is to what I'm curious if MMT has spread into the Nordic countries at all, because I do wonder why they have such high tax rates if they don't need to, because from what I'm aware of, despite being in the European Union, all of the Nordic countries have their own currencies. So I wonder why their tax rates are super high, not just on the rich, but even on like working people, why their tax rates are so high if they don't need to be to fund their social programs.
Do
Well,
the
first of
Nordic
all-
countries have their own currencies?
Yeah.
How are they part of the EU and have their own currencies? I mean, I thought that was reserved specifically just for England, like as a special provision of them to join the European Union.
Wait, I thought they did have their own currency. Wait,
Well, like
am I mistaken?
I mean, maybe, I guess maybe they do. I just thought that like, Germany and France and Spain and Italy, like they all use the same fucking currency. So I just thought that everybody in the European Union.
Yeah. No, they do.
And
Yeah.
Sweden's part of the EU. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I thought everybody in the EU was required to take up the fucking euro.
No, I was like, I mean, I didn't know that. I wasn't sure who had to do that or not. I know they made like, wait.
Yeah. So can you look up countries that use the euro?
These countries.
See, that's what I was confused about. Is
So most of them, it looks like, but not all of them.
that's interesting. Oh wait, economic and monetary union. Can you look at the that map on the left, the red map on the left side?
Over here?
Yeah. So I see. So these are the people that are in the European Union, but some of the people haven't. I see.
Yeah, I haven't adopted
The newer, I think the newer admits like Poland, for example, are still slow to adopt the euro.
Or maybe they just don't want to.
Yeah, I just wonder what that's about. Anyway, I didn't know. That's crazy.
Just step back one step on the last little story. It amazes me that the left have this sort of tax the rich mentality, because they're really if you know the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, the ultimate neoliberal, libertarian, right-wing screed.
That book.
Well, that's all about how the working class are subservient to the industrial and upper class. The upper class create all the value through their dynamics and their insights and their foresight to invest their capital in that book, the whole concept is, the industrial class are very generous in allowing this lazy, indolent sort of workers who do nothing but drink and eat and have sex to share in the bounty that the industrial class create. And, the tax the rich narrative is just that. It's just a really crazy perversion of left thinking, in my view. Now, to your next question, and it really helps us understand what the role of taxation is in MMT. So when I say to audiences, look, the government doesn't need taxes in order to spend, they obviously then say, well, why the hell do they tax this thing? You're crazy, they're taxing us. And I say, well, then you have to understand what taxes do. Now, and this is relating to the Nordic companies. Not all the Nordic countries have their own currencies. Finland doesn't, for example. Finland uses the euro. Sweden and Norway have their own currencies. Denmark has its own currencies, but pegs it to the euro, so it reduces its sovereignty in its own currency. Effectively, they've got to take the dynamics of the euro system. All right, so take a scenario where all the productive resources are being used in the economy. So they're being bought by various users. And the currency issuing government wants to introduce a major decarbonisation of the economy, which will require it to mobilise, because the market won't do it, private market, the government has to mobilise a whole stack of resources in the public sphere to promote transition away from fossil fuel use. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, the government has no financial constraint, so it can go into the private market and buy up those resources if it wants to. Now, to shift into a green economy, if you like. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, if all the resources are currently being used, the only way the government can succeed in doing that is to outbid the current users. It can buy them, no problem. It can never run out of its currency, but it has to go into a bidding process in the market system and outbid the current users. Now, what are the implications of that? Obviously, that would be inflationary, because they would have to, there'd be a bidding war there for those resources, which would put up the prices of those resources and the costs of production, et cetera, et cetera. So how can it do that without creating an inflationary situation? Well, come in tax, because what taxes do is deprive the non-government sector of purchasing power. And the government doesn't need the tax revenue to spend, but what it needs is for the non-government sector to be able to spend less. Why? Because that then...
Yeah, so the taxes just make sure that the non-government sector can't spend, so that the government can spend more.
Yeah.
Because
And so that
you
it
do
doesn't
have
just
to
like
control the inflation. So they're controlling the inflation by high taxes, but that's only because you need the high taxes to control inflation so that the government can spend all the money providing the services you want it to. I mean, that is
yeah. So I think that
that is essentially like a command, like a centralized.
I think MMT and like uh most monetary like mainstream monetary theory aren't too different in that regard. Like I think that like it's really just like how do you frame the same question as a framing fucking game, Brandon? It's really how you frame the question. Like, is the government taxing you so that they have the money to spend, or are they taxing you so that they can outbid you for the purchase that they for the you know? And it's really just like they're saying the same thing. Like
But
they're tracking the same
it is a
material
different
things.
it is a very different implication though. Like
Yeah.
like the taxes are still necessary, but the purpose for which they're necessary is different. It's not for revenue.
Yeah.
It's to reduce purchasing power from the private sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea is that the government, yeah, you're letting the government control. So rather than believe that like like theoretically enterprise was supposed to check other enterprises. Like the whole point of capitalism initially was that like was that like competition would bring a balance essentially of businesses and firms, people's ingenuity and design and come with new ideas and whatever. But what ended up just happening was just monopolies, which isn't obviously competitive. So yeah, this is just also like it obviously does reflect, like in his case, the left wing value shift of like, I believe that the government should should be the vehicle that improves inequality, that whatever, like you're giving obviously significantly more power to the government rather than the private interest. Which is another question entirely of itself, is can you give your or do you trust your government enough, especially given theoretically it should be fine though, because the idea is that if you democratically vote for your government, then theoretically, and there's no money to lobby them, then theoretically your views should be represented.
Well, yeah, at the very least,
Theoretically.
compared to private interest, at the very least, you have more representatives, say, at the level of politics than you do at the level of your workplace, for example. And so the way that your boss spends their money on investments in certain things, you have practically zero to no say, on how it fucking goes. But you have some say, quote unquote, democratically when you elect an official about how that shit will be allocated. So at the very least, and like the theoretical, like the main level of analysis, like yeah, you vote for your politicians even if they're like chosen by fucking
The
oligarchs
Koch
or whatever.
brothers.
Like even if like who your candidates are really likely to be based on like agitprop or whatever, like you can only really choose between fucking Kamala Harris and Donald Trump or whatever. At the very least, you do have quote unquote some say in a way that you just have zero say or zero like a veneer. You don't even have a veneer of say with respect to how your private companies spend their money.
Well, it is a nice way to bypass that whole First Amendment legislation too, because if you can't directly stop money donations in politics, you can at least stop it by reducing the money supply of corporations so they have less money to throw into politics.
Yeah, and then the question is, how do you get that to become a thing in the first place if the politicians would never do that because they want to make money, and that the people that they are propped up uh, are people who are not going to introduce those bills because the what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, but the thing is, like, if this is true, like let's say this theory is true, MMT is like a lens that is true, that this is this is a process that can happen and without major negative repercussions or whatever. Well, then if enough people were conscious about that, I think that eventually it would change, because like you can only like this would then become an argument, a debate about a scientific debate, if it can be a scientific debate, like an economics debate. And once the debate is settled, like if like it's a fact. Now, of course, they're still going to try to subvert the fact, but the truth is, I am a believer that the truth Well, never mind. I'll just leave it there.
Means that you would have shift to a situation where all the resources were being used to a situation where some resources weren't being used, because the taxation reduces the capacity of the non-government sector to spend, which frees up resources, creates idle resources. If you want to be simple, creates unemployment. Now, that unemployment would persist. That idle set of resources would exist unless the government increased its spending. And so what the taxes do is create the fiscal space in which the government can spend and bring resources into productive use without creating a bidding warfare that is inflationary pressures. So the taxation is essential to reduce the capacity of the non-government sector to use productive resources. Simple as that. Now, then you ask yourself the question, well, the sort of Scandi model, the Scandinavian model, so there's different philosophies of the role of government in the world, and there's different concepts of the welfare state. So the Anglo sort of English-speaking welfare state is a much meaner form of welfare state than the Scandinavian model. Scandinavian model is much more inclusive, generous, and what it implies is larger government, a larger government role in the economy. So Scandinavian governments spend more as a proportion of total spending than, say, the US government and the Australian government. The Australian government spends more as a proportion than the US government, for example, because the US government has a meaner concept, a much narrower concept of the role of government in provision of welfare spending and public education and all those things. Whereas in the Scandinavian countries, I'm much more inclined to accept a larger role for the state in public education, public health, public transport, public infrastructure provision, utility provision, power and gas and water and those sort of things. So then you say to yourself, well, if the government's going to have a larger footprint of the economy, they have to, in other words, given there's finite resources at any point in time, they have to deprive the non-government sector of a larger footprint than if the government had a smaller footprint. In other words, they have to have higher levels of tax, not to fund the higher spending, but to reduce the non-government sector claims on the resources so they don't have inflation. That's the explanation that an MMT economist would give.
It would also be to generate value for the currency, no? Because that's the way I've understood MMT's theory of the purpose of taxation is also to generate value for that currency, so people demand it. And I assume that not many people use the Scandinavian currencies, the Scandinavian countries, and they probably import a lot of things. They can't produce everything, so they probably want to keep some level of a decently valued currency, so they keep high taxes. But do they need to be as high as they are? Because I know Warren Mosler advocates that a large amount of income tax could be removed, and that sales tax could also be removed, for example. And yeah, I'm curious about that, if they could reduce it much more, because that's a quagmire that I've noticed when advocating social democratic or socialist policies is people will say, well, yeah, but then our taxes are all going to go up, right? This is the objection you get in America.
Well, I mean, this all comes back down to values. Warren and I differ somewhat, and in our latest book, I haven't got a copy of it here, in our latest book, Modern Monetary Theory, Bill and Warren's Excellent Adventure, we discuss how we came to get together and how we effectively founded modern monetary theory.
It's going to be you and me in
And
60 years.
we take a sort of a dialectical
Our fun
approach
adventure.
in narrative, in the sense that we illuminate the reader on the differences that we have individually to things. So at various points in the book, we say, Bill says this, Warren says this, Bill doesn't agree with this, Warren doesn't agree with this sort of thing. And these are those things. There's no fundamental agreement on the principles of MMT, on the lens, but there are some disagreements on the basis of values. So Warren prefers more private enterprise than I do.
They're like us for real. Every good right winger has their left winger counterpart.
So Warren sees a lower tax environment and a lower government spending environment as preferable to me, who's solid traditional leftist, who believes in much larger government footprints in providing. I don't believe in private education. I don't believe in private universities.
My only problem is that I just don't trust the government, and I have lots of reasons not to. CIA being one of them. Like yes, you could argue you shouldn't trust the private corporations either. I would say that's true, but with the private corporation, I don't have to buy their product or service. If the government tells me I have to do something, I have to actually do something. There's legal consequences. I don't have to use Facebook. I don't have to use YouTube. I don't have to use Twitter. I can say no.
You don't have.
But if the government says, huh?
You don't have to use the public transportation they provide. You don't have to use all the public facilities they
Well,
provide.
I mean, it'd be kind of hard to get around.
If you think about the governmental role, if you look at the role of the government in this type of thing of like giving out infrastructure or whatever, like I think that the issue is that people traditionally conflate the notion of like the law providing aspect of the government and the distributive branch of the government that's meant to give us the whatever, like funds food and funds infrastructure and funds.
Is
public
it not the
transport.
Congress that funds that is the purse?
Well, no, it is. But the thing is, like, you're looking at this singular body who is like responsible for both of these things and thinking like, you know, insofar as they are the legislative body, like I should be skeptical of also their power to provide adequate public education if they had that shit on their agenda.
Well,
Like-
I mean, you're saying like the fear of totalitarianism, which is what I'm afraid
Because
of.
it's not because it's not giving them more money doesn't necessarily give them more.
You wouldn't say it gives them more power if they have more money?
Well, it depends on how they're spending that money.
Sure. No. Like I said, if I knew my government had my interest in mind, I would be more willing to accept that. If I lived in like a Nordic country, I would be perfectly okay with giving that, like, you know, but I have a sufficient reason to trust my government. I have sufficient reason to distrust the American government. More than sufficient evidence. That's why I'm hesitant.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, like, they're still going to take our taxes regardless, and they're going to spend it on the
Bullshit.
military and the fucking police and all the other stupid shit that we don't want them to be spending it on. But like, I think the whole point is that with the government, you can say,
No, I just hope
like-
that they're spending it on the right things, is all I'm saying. Like, how do we... My problem is, like, already now we can't control how they spend the money. So what happens when they have all the control to spend the money?
it's not that they have all the control to spend the money. It's like
Like, they throw
I mean,
billions of dollars at, like, Ukraine and Israel, and they do all this shit overnight, and nobody hears about it. And, like, I mean, you know what I mean? And now I have my own money, right? Because, like, people would argue for, like, certain taxes here. Well, no, but I mean, like, people have their own money, right?
some people. Most people don't. And that's the problem. Is that we
Well,
give all this power to,
people-
like 10 people who are privately.
No, but
private individuals who
Cameron,
have
come
no-
on. You know what I'm saying? People make salaries. People make income. People generate income, right? Like, no, they don't generate, but you know what I'm saying? Like, people have salaries. And so, like, all I'm saying is just that, the idea is that you're trusting the government to take. So, okay, so the taxes would be higher because the idea is that those, or no,
Taxes be higher
the
on
taxes would-
particular classes
well-
of people.
well, I think it would probably be higher for everybody, so that the entire non-government, so that all non-government revenue is decreased. The pie is already smaller.
It doesn't have to be. Like, you can literally just say, like, because most private citizens don't have enough revenue already to even compete with the government with respect to.
I mean, if it was just the rich, I'd be fine. But
that's the idea, and like that was the idea of the socialist movement, not socialist, but like the democratic socialist Keynesian economic model of the 40s through the 70s.
wasn't
that was the primary
he
idea.
just saying right now that, like, in the Nordic countries, that even the Nordic, like the middle class people also are taxed heavily? Like there's no surplus revenue, like there's no surplus money in their pocket.
That's not. I mean, I don't think that's true. But I mean, but also the question was like, is this a necessary case? Like, is this necessary?
That is the question, yeah.
And I think the point is, in a place like America,
But why do you, Cameron, trust the government to actually spend the money wisely?
I trust the government more than I trust private individuals like Elon Musk.
And why do you trust the government, the CIA, more than Elon Musk?
Because at the very least, when it comes to the government, if you can like talk to people, you can change people's minds, quote unquote, right?
How do you
At the
change
very
the CIA's mind?
No, it's not about changing the CIA's mind. You can change the voters' mind. The voters have, quote unquote, some control over what happens in the.
But if the CIA is an agent of evil, now it has more money by the government to farm more psyops and more
But
campaigns.
it's not that it doesn't. It's not that it has more money, because at the same time, like the government and the private sector are working hand in hand with one another.
A little too much.
And yeah, I mean, because the private sector funds the government, and the government, says, all right, Israel, if you want to buy our weapons, you have to buy it from Lockheed Martin, sponsored by Lockheed Martin. And so, like, there's this reciprocal relationship between the two. But what I have an issue with is these private corporations that are not democratically elected, that have no genuine value, because yet again, we can like you can't really, in a lot of regards, you can't really protest food. And when our food is like so monopolized in the way that it even is, it really becomes a problem when one corporation or two corporations own like all the food companies. And so you can't even really reasonably, especially given that you want to like have conveniences and kind of enjoy your life or whatever. You can't really like boycott all of these fucking horrible industries because to an extent, like you have to live. You have to get oil from ExxonMobil if you want to drive your fucking car. You have to get oil from Chevron if you want to drive your fucking car. And that to me is a problem. And I think that the only reason why I'm more trusting of the government than I am of these corporations is because at the very least with the government you can in fact vote. You do have some say. And now if we had an economic system where I could vote for my boss, perhaps I wouldn't trust the government more. Perhaps I'd trust my local fucking
Yeah, like let's
boss
say it was
more.
co-ops. Nothing but co-ops.
Like perhaps then I would trust that more because I would think that they would have more stake in my interest than the government, for example.
Yeah, because they're directly employing you, or like you're directly working for this organization. They need you, you need it, so your interests are aligned.
But here's the other issue though, is that there are some problems that are too big for
I agree.
singular corporations to take, and that's what I think the government is there for things like public transport that have like no return on investment. When you don't get a return on investment when you invest in your infrastructure, for example.
Well, you
Like,
could.
the
I mean, you
government does.
could. I mean,
The
you
government
could. You
does, but,
could.
like a corporation doesn't.
Well,
because they're
it
just getting
does. That's what toll roads are.
Yeah, the toll roads are fucking stupid. But like that, we don't want to create a two-tiered system where you have to work a dead-end job and you get paid $2.75 an hour. That's what, did I tell you that shit about Darian working at Domino's for a week?
What'd you say about Darian working at Domino's?
Darian works at Domino's for a week, and he was paid $2.75 an hour. Because that's fucking legal in Texas as long as they're supposed to be making it up in tips.
Are you serious? Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we did talk about that. That's right.
And it's like, I don't want the ability to get around to be predicated on my nice corporation that I voted for has a monopoly on the roads, and now
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Oh, I need 1 second. I need to let my dog out. I don't know, Cameron. The problem I have is that if you recall, it was the capitalist class already has control of the government, right? They use the CIA to fund and create the PSY-OPS and so forth, right? So what I don't understand is if they already have. So my problem is that with a private entity like a corporation, you can sue them. They can get in trouble by legal means, right? Like you still have that power to vote.
You can sue the government too.
No, no, you can't stop the CIA. It has unchecked power.
Oh, you can sue the government.
No one. Okay, Cameron, who sues the CIA? Yeah, be fucking for real, my guy. Be fucking for real. The government. The government has exclusive right to do whatever it wants in the best interest of itself.
No,
eminent domain. That's part of its.
No. Literally, what the fucking Constitution provides for you is if they fucking violate the Fifth Amendment, you have recourse to say, I am suing the federal government because it's fucking broke the Bill of Rights. It took away my due process to whatever the fuck, and I am suing the government. And you can do that, and you can win a case, and it can become a Supreme Court case, and you get fucking reparations, and you can get whatever the fuck. But you can, in fact, sue the government. You can
Okay,
sue
so
both
has the CIA stopped doing its psyops?
no.
Why?
Because people are complicit and unaware of these psyops, I think.
Because suing doesn't do shit.
Suing does do shit.
If
Suing
it
is a
did, then
way-
why would it not stop? Well, what happened to all the black people who got infected with diseases from the CIA? Were they held liable?
I think they did get.
Martin
I
Luther
think they do.
Martin Luther King assassination, was he held? Was anyone held liable?
We haven't
What
found
about the Black
so-
Panther guy who was shot in his bed? Was he held? Was anyone else held liable? We can go down, Cameron, and come up with thousands of instances of abuse of governmental power, and it never faced any real
we
consequence.
can talk about the same thing with respect to the fucking.
The
corporations, too.
problem, no, corporations do actually get sued, and things actually do change. McDonald's, for example, had that hot coffee thing. It was too hot. Some lady got burned because of the coffee was too damn hot. They sued McDonald's. She won like billions, okay, not billions, but like millions of dollars, and McDonald's had to start making less hot coffee. It had,
But the same thing happened with the U.S. government when they fucking didn't let fucking black people ride on the fucking train at the same time, and then somebody sued the government and said you can't do that.
The
It's a
problem is
Fourth Amendment violation.
there's a difference between the government and then the shadow organizations, the Secret Service agencies in the government. It's like a completely different process. It's not all the same government. There's like a government, which is what you and I see, and then there's like a shadow government, which is who executes all political leaders in opposition and who also works hand in hand with the capitalist class to create psyop campaigns. This is a very.
But that's not the government. Like that's not necessarily the problem that we're talking about.
I thought
Like,
to me that is a problem.
In the same way that you're talking about these corporations as if they're not tied to the CIA, I'm talking about the government in the same way that it's not tied to the CIA.
No, I'm saying that corporations already control the CIA, for example. That's how they were able to use the CIA. Why? Okay, Cameron. Why would the corporations need to use the CIA to fund these psyops and these think tanks if it could have just done it by its own private enterprise?
No, I mean I'm saying it's an interaction between the two of them.
Right,
At the very
but
least,
what's
when
the
it comes to
point? But let me.
the government, you get
No,
to
but-
vote. You get to vote in the people.
No, but answer my question. Why? What? If they're the private enterprise, why can't they just do all that manipulation, all that psyop, all that bullshit by themselves? Why do they need to go through the CIA to do that?
Well, they don't have to go through the CIA to do fucking
So why-
Fox News.
So why do you think they did?
No, I mean the like they. It's just help. I think it's just helpful if you can. You can
Agree.
drive
Wha-
politicians,
I
why
agree.
would-
I-
Why would you not?
These aren't politicians, the people in the CIA, but
No, but they are. But the way that the CIA gets that power in the first place is that the fucking look. I think we have an issue where I think that the fundamental problem is the corporations who then buy out our politicians, who then employ people in the CIA and the FBI who are going to benefit the class interests of the corporations because the corporations are paying the people who are paying the people.
Mm-hmm.
So my fundamental issue is that the corporations have too much power, and that democratic shit is undermined by virtue of the fact that corporations have too much power. Our democracy is undermined by the fact that you can buy a vote. It's not undermined by the fact that we have a democracy that ends up getting shitty politicians, and the shitty politicians are just evil, and then they work with capitalists. It's the idea that the capitalists are paying people to become in power in the first place because they have all this extra money and all the ability to go on Fox News and promote these people, and go on CNN and promote these people, and to fucking kneecap Bernie Sanders, and to kill, they pay, and also yet again, I think we need to recognize that the government is working hand in hand with the corporations by virtue of the fact that they don't want like a black liberation movement to overthrow the government. That was a big fear in the 70s in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So it seems that our government, the public and the private enterprise, both have an equally shared agenda of trying to keep certain well, you would say the non-capitalist class down.
Yes. The working class. They're trying to make sure that the working class.
Okay. And so
Cool.
my question is also like, if that's the case, we acknowledge that they're clearly working hand in hand because they have they have a shared enemy, let's say, the working class. Now why would the government suddenly start caring about people when the private enterprise aspect of it is gone? If by their own merits they already have an antagonistic relationship
No, I think they have an antagonistic relationship because they are the same people. The
I agree.
corporations they are the same people. And once that class interest is gone, because the ruling class only exists by virtue of the fact that all of our politicians are millionaires and people who own businesses and who own large portions of these things and have large shares in it, Lockheed Martin, have large shares in APAC, have large shares in all these things. And I think that so I don't know what the order of operations is with respect to this, but my main thing is I want to democratize the workplace so that there are no CEO class that now has a significant sway over politics. And then when we democratically vote for things, democracy will actually be able to be stable because there's no corporation getting in the way of it. And so you'll actually be able to vote for people who actually have your interests at heart because you're not choosing from the pool of people that were picked out by fucking Lockheed Martin and Elon Musk.
Yeah, you're saying you think by removing the private sector's power over the government won't be co-opted.
Yes. So for me, the order of operations is, and that's why I'm not so big on the whole taxing the rich thing. I think that it's a big deal. I think it's important to an extent because I think that we do still need to fund our healthcare systems, and the government is doing good things with respect to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. It is doing good things in those regards, and a lot of our expenditures do go to making sure that we have good public facilities. To an extent, they have to make sure that we're okay. They had to make sure that we're okay enough to go to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they have to keep us.
Fair enough.
And so in that regard, I'm a big fan of funding these things through taxation of the rich. But at the same time, funding these things, yet again, I'm doing the fucking...
Oh, Cameron, get out of the neoliberal eye.
Yeah. So I'm big on taxing the rich.
Holy shit, he's a plant.
They got me, the CIA fucking got... It's always the person closest to you.
I knew he was a plant.
But in any case, yeah. So that's for me the fundamental thing is I think that the government as it currently exists, I don't want the government having more money right now. I do not want our government as it currently exists to have more money right now.
Okay, yeah, we agree. Okay, I think we agree. We just had to align each other on the same time frame. We both agree right now would not be ideal.
Yeah, no, especially not right now. Yeah.
Obviously you would have to first defund the private sector so that there's less money, and then over time, your idea is that the corrupting influences would begin to fade out.
Because they wouldn't be beholden to APAC.
There's no monetary incentive for them to continue exploiting the working class.
Yeah, because there will be the working class would
but also it's not just I think my issue is just sometimes with these leftist analyses is that they think that money is the only means of oppressing people. You can also oppress people with power.
Well, that's not. But I'm not talking about the money. The money's not the main issue here. Yet again, it's the relationship that people have to the means of production that my issue is.
Sure, I mean that's fine, but obviously taxing the rich isn't going to change the relationships of the means of production.
Which is why I'm not primarily interested in taxing the rich. Which is why
fair.
I'm primarily interested in democracy in the workplace.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, you would obviously need democracy in the workplace alongside with, let's say a taxing of the rich.
I think so, because that's if
that discourages any possibility.
Yeah, if you let the rich keep their money or whatever, then eventually they'll just instantly destroy the progress that we've made because they'll establish a new class interest by having this surplus value that they're going to fucking pay campaigns on to make us vote against our own interests or whatever, like we always do.
Fair enough.
Believes in much larger government footprints in providing. I don't believe in private education. I don't believe in private universities. I don't believe in private healthcare. I don't believe in private transport. I believe that.
Well, see, he doesn't believe in anything private.
He doesn't believe in any of the private
elements of our human rights that should be provided by the state on behalf of all of us.
Which I agree with.
Maximize our well-being rather than those things should not be provided for private profit. So there are differences in value. And so when Warren...
Yeah, we're just like those guys for real.
...says, the Scandinavian countries can reduce spending and taxes. Well, of course they can. But then they've got to ultimately reduce the government footprint to allow less fiscal space to maintain price stability than I would have. That's the explanation for that.
And speaking of government ownership, the question I've been really wanting to ask an MMT economist is whether MMT economists have their own unique understanding of the Soviet Union and the systems kind of like that in the Soviet states, in which the state controlled everything. And that's not what I'm advocating. What I find very interesting about these countries is that they funded all sort of different social programs, very expensive ones. I mean, even housing and everything. And there was never this question of where the money is going to come from. Where are you going to come from? We're going to tax the population. So I found it actually a very good case to kind of prove MMT correct. Even though like they weren't aware of MMT, that didn't exist back then, but they weren't asking those questions as to where you're going to get the money from. I mean, it just seemed like, oh, we're going to go to space. We're just going to go build the rockets. We're going to go hire the employees who need to go do that. But I wonder, like, maybe were they able to do that because they could control inflation, because they could control prices. And sometimes I hear Warren Mosler say, how would you combat inflation? He says the state can set prices. And I know MMT economists like yourself also say that. I wonder to what extent this entails that preventing inflation requires a more planned economy, if not not necessarily a total planned economy, but a more planned economy.
Well, look, that's a really complex set of issues. It embraces history and other things. I mean, the Soviet-type planning model effectively
I
failed to
spilled all that
deliver
water.
well-being to its people. And the problem was, theoretically, the planning model was fine, but the information shortfalls that would occur proved to be difficult. So how do you match consumer preferences with factory production on an immediate sort of basis so that you don't have gluts of widget A that people don't want to eat or consume and shortages of widget B that everybody wants? And, the planning system in that era did have discrepancies in matching production with consumer wants, for example. Now, that's not to say that the capitalist system does it well either, because we've got the role of advertising that manipulates what we want, and we end up with a lot of junk being produced that we're manipulated into buying that doesn't help well-being at all.
Facts.
But the point is that 1940s planning systems could be totally possible now because of the technological developments of computer networks, for example. So
What are 1940s planning systems? Is that like the stuff that we talked about in not Colombia? What South American country was that?
Chile.
That Chile that had. Is that what they mean by the planning systems?
Well, a lot of socialist quote unquote economies of like the Soviet Union and China and many had like planned economies where they were planned through these massive bureaucratic organizations where they just had, here are the list of expenditures that we want the state to invest in. And here are all the workers we have, here are all the materials we have, here's the time it'll take to do this. And so that rather than having private enterprise like dictate, how much a screw was going to cost based on like, the fluctuations of the volatile market, there are these set prices based on a yearly 5-year plan or a 10-year plan of, whatever your planning system. And like, it was based on like economic models that would say, okay, based on all these things that we know about the materials we have access to and the factories we have access to and the amount of people we have access to, here's how much these things need to be worth. Here's how they need to be moved around. Here's how we exchange them. And it wasn't based on like market fluctuations or anything like that. It wasn't based on like the people's purchasing powers and shit like that. And so a lot of the problem with that is that, you have a disruption in a plant and it fucks up your plan. You have workers strike or whatever, and you get fucked up. And you didn't have immediate reaction because you had to go all across the country to get that information.
I see why that
and
would
by the
be
time you had that
problematic,
information, by the time you got that information, now your fucking plan's fucked.
Yeah, the whole thing shaboof.
And so now that was like the biggest complaint that capitalists were making in the 40s, 50s, 60s about like planned economies like the Soviet Union, is that they just fucking fail in that regard.
Which is a fair complaint at that time.
Yeah, it's a great and fair criticism. And so the new models of like what Chile was trying to do in 71 or whatever with its rudimentary computer system in a smaller country or whatever was to mitigate those problems by having direct access
instantaneous
to the
live updating of the supply chain.
You can see how many nails have gone through. You can see where there's supply chain stops.
And is that what he's referring to when he's talking about these 1940s computer networks that he's saying would work today?
Oh, he's saying that the planned economies of the 1940s did not rely on those computer networks because Chile tried this thing, but yet again, it never really was able to succeed because the coup happened before it was able to truly implement this stuff. But all these, the problems that we had from the planning economy, he says now contemporary computer networks might be able to solve those problems.
Got it. Okay.
So
cool.
That's cool.
Computer networks, online shopping sends instantaneous information and messages to capitalists as to what consumer preferences are. So we could have a more planned economy with sophisticated modern computer systems immediately telling the factories what people wanted to buy and what they didn't want to buy, which would then immediately inform production processes on what should be produced on a daily basis. So the old problems of the Soviet system could be now overcome, in my view. Now, does that mean we want to go to a totally planned economy? No, I don't think so, because I also think there's value in sort of small scale shops and things, craft production and musicians and things like this, sort of small enterprises. That's the first point I make. The second point is that how do you control inflation in the system? Well, what MMT tells us is that ultimately there's two broad ways of controlling inflation. You can either do it through unemployment or you can do it through an employment
No job.
And what do I mean by that? Well, the way in which the neoliberal system controls inflation, attempts to control inflation, is effectively to create unemployment. And what unemployment does is create fear of income loss and job loss among workers who might be bargaining for higher salaries and higher incomes. And it also creates a problem for firms who are selling into product markets because they start to are unable to sell their produce. And so the bargaining dynamics change so that the firms with markup power have less incentive to use that. And the employees with industrial power have less incentive to strike and go on demand higher wages. Just excuse me. We've been talking a lot. And
Oh, good. I can cut that out. I edit all that. If there's anything you want me to cut, I can do it.
there's no problem. So unemployment is a way of disciplining the distributional struggle that leads to higher margin push and inflation. So the MMT position is that you're much better. That unemployment is terribly damaging to families and individuals. A better way of dealing with inflationary pressures emerging from distributional struggle is to have an employment policy where the government says it'll employ everybody at a fixed wage, a social inclusive minimum wage. And I've called that the job guarantee, MMT. And why that creates an inflation anchor is big guarantee, MMT. It'll employ everybody at a fixed wage, a social inclusive minimum wage. And I've called that the job guarantee, MMT. And why that creates an inflation anchor is because it's the government setting the price of one important commodity, the price that it's willing to pay for any worker who doesn't have a job. And that will eventually work its way through the cost structure. Now, how does that work? Well, if there's excessive demand in the economy, excessive spending, and the government has to tighten fiscal policy, for example, normally in our current system, that would create unemployment. And that'll eventually stifle inflationary pressures in the ways I mentioned. But in an employment job guarantee economy, the workers still lose jobs in the inflating sectors, but are able to move into the job guarantee sector, which shifts workers into a fixed price sector. Now, eventually that will stop the inflationary pressures. So even though you're still forcing people to lose work and move into a minimum wage sector, that's preferable than shifting them into unemployment, forcing them into unemployment.
I agree.
Now, then you say to yourself, well, is that a desirable system? Well, it's a reflection of the realities of the capitalist system, where distributional conflict will create inflation. And if you don't like the job guarantee, really all you're saying is you don't like capitalism, because a job guarantee is a preferred system within the boundaries of a capitalist dynamic. It's better than unemployment, but clearly we would want a system, ideally, that doesn't have those distributional struggles. But then you're talking about a non-capitalist system. And so then the question is, okay, how do you get to that? Now, a lot of people have criticized me for advocating a job guarantee, for example, because they say, oh, you're just wanting to put a Band-Aid on capitalism, and you're reducing the shock of unemployment, and therefore you're reducing the dynamic of subjective class consciousness, and therefore you're reducing the revolutionary capacity of the working class and postponing the revolution. Well, what I say to them is this.
It sounds like a lot of these Marxists are a little...
Accelerationist. That's why some of there's that MAGA communism bullshit or whatever.
Yeah,
There are a
there's
lot
a
of
faction in
Marxists who
there.
are
It's
like-
kind of crazy. They're kind of
Yeah,
radical
they're very
people.
revolutionary.
You say you want a revolution. Well, hey, don't you know we all want to change the world? Tell me it's the institutions. Well, hey. All right, anyways. John Lennon talked about those people.
One of my favorite bands is called Brooklyn Funk Essentials. They're a New York-based socialist cooperative of brilliant musicians.
Write that down,
Bands
write
is
that
called
down.
Brooklyn Funk Essentials.
Cameron, write that down, write that down.
I'm gonna go visit the Brooklyn Funk Essentials actually.
Yo, we should pull up, bro. Where you going?
Tomorrow.
Oh, shit.
Take a day trip there.
Day trip?
Day trip to New York City, brother.
Yo.
They're a New York-based socialist cooperative of brilliant musicians. And one of their songs from their first album is "The Revolution was postponed due to rain." And what it's about is that these left-wing activists get together to overthrow the capitalist system, and all sorts of things get in the way of it. Someone slept in and didn't go to the protest, or ultimately, because it rains down, they don't want to go out and march and have a revolution. But it's a really insightful song because it's about the state of the left, intellectual left. And what I say to people who criticize me for wanting to postpone the overthrow is that, okay, it's all very well for you characters who are drinking your lattes and you're having your almond croissants in the cafe on a Saturday morning, plotting the revolution. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, baby, the capitalist system is creating dreadful poverty and unemployment. And if I can, and we're so far away from a revolutionary dynamic, that if I can create some well-being for the downtrodden and the working class by giving them a dignified job with a socially inclusive income through a job guarantee, while you plot the revolution, I'm going to be much happier doing that. And when we get to the stage where we've got a revolutionary vanguard that's going to man or person the barricades and overthrow the capitalist system, I'll be there leading the charge. But until that stage, I'm quite happy to have Band-Aids that dignify humanity and help downtrodden
Dignity.
workers into living their
Dignity.
life within capitalism. That's my position.
Dignity drop.
And at least we know social democracy does work. You know, it's something you can do in the meantime, but instead of immediately trying to do something that, you know, we may not know works and screw things up. I think it's at the very least you have a intermediary mixed economy that can guarantee, you know, massive improvements for people's lives. And I just want to clarify, so would MMTers favor price controls on certain things as ways to prevent inflation?
Look, I'm not a supporter of price controls. I think that they pervert the system, the capitalists get around them, and black markets emerge. I think that it's much better to have a sophisticated government planning bureau. During the 1960s, for example, you know, most advanced countries had very sophisticated, what they call manpower planning systems. So they would typically run through departments of employment or departments of labour. In the US, they would run through the labour department. And these systems were very sophisticated given the state of technology and information in those days. But what they sought to do was to work out where the government would be planning spending on public infrastructure or something, trying to estimate where the private market was heading, and then forecasting what would be the labour requirements so there wouldn't be any widespread shortages of skill. And they were doing, and then informing training and apprenticeship systems to feed into the labour planning systems. Now, what they were trying to do was obviously reduce the prospect of the private market getting into a situation where there'd be dramatic shortages of skilled labour, which would lead to inflationary pressures coming from bidding up existing skilled labour that was in shortage. So, you know, I favour those sort of planning systems. And now with modern computing systems and AI and all the rest of it, we've got much better capacity to generate intelligence about where the economy is going. And also, I think that with the climate emergency, we're going to have much more planning anyway run through the state as we try to shift away from carbon-based economies. I prefer that sort of planning infrastructure than price controls.
The very last question I wanted to ask is something less pertaining to MMT and more pertaining to your very particular geographic context, that is Australia.
Yawn.
Because something I've been learning about recently, reading the historian Louis Hart's in his book, The Founding of New Societies, is the part on Australia. I realized I did not know very much about Australian political history, and I don't think very many people do either. And you're from Australia, and I'd be curious to, you know, elucidate because I was learning about the Australian labor movement and how powerful it was due to its unique founding as a penal colony and having a very different class composition than that of the United States and even Canada, and having very different politics. And he has this quote where Louis Hart's where he says, America was very much, in every sense of the word, a classic capitalist dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. You know, they had much more political power. In Australia, they had a dictatorship of labor over capital. At least that's what he says. He didn't say it's socialism, but he said dictatorship of labor over capital, strong labor movements. And I'm curious to just learn from you as to what, like, your perspective on the current state of Australian politics, and, you know, why or if, because from what I get is that that labor movement kind of died in Australia, and why that happened, and if there's a prospect of that coming back. Because it seemed Australia was unique compared to the other settler colonial countries in having a very strong labor movement.
Look, Australia, a lot of people think, Australia must be a bit like America, and because America has such a pervasive export of its culture, its capitalist culture, its mass consumption culture, its sort of individuality culture, all of that sort of raw stuff. But the reality is that despite the sort of American imperialism, cultural imperialism, we are quite a very different country to America, very different culture. I mean, we share the same language, sort of, even though our accents are quite different, but and our spelling and grammar is a little bit different. But, you know, we both come from Britain, ultimately. So, you know, why wouldn't we be similar? Well, the answer is we're not similar at all. Quite different country, Australia, to the US. And I've travelled and been in the US extensively, so I think I can say that with some certainty. American society is an incredibly insular society. So I remember during the breakdown of the socialist state of Yugoslavia, and all of the troubles in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Australia, there was daily news coverage of the tragedies that were going on in, you know, the genocide that was going on in that part of the world. And I flew to San Francisco at the height of that. And on the front page of the major San Francisco newspaper, there was a story about an animal that had been stuck up a tree in Oakland, and the fire rescue service had to be called out. And I said, God, you know, because the whole news story in Australia was Bosnia and all of that stuff on front page of our news coverage. And that I searched for it in the newspaper in San Francisco. It was a tiny little 1-inch column in the American newspaper, a major city newspaper. And what that taught me, and it illustrates how America's awareness stops at your border. It's a relatively insular country. And that's led to all of this stuff about American exceptionalism. And we could, the outsiders talk about American exceptionalism, that, you know, you see the world, well, you're Canadian, but Americans see the world in their own image and don't really understand the rest of the world very well at all. Now, how did that come about? Well, the American settlements were free settlements, whereas Australia was a prison colony. We were founded on the basis that the white class, I mean, the indigenous class in Australia is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. You know, 30 or 40,000 years they've occupied the land that I'm on, and that's a separate debate altogether. But the white settlement, the colonial settlement, was essentially, you know, Britain, when they invoked the Poor Laws in Britain, they started imprisoning people, you know, and the enclosure movement that forced the low income, the poor, the workers.
They forced the poor into prison.
So what did they do? They stole bread.
Oh yeah, bro, that's
Eventually,
what I was talking about with the
prison
history of
ships in the
madness and shit like
River,
that.
and the prison system got flooded because of the sort of pernicious social legislation that the British government introduced.
Like, yeah, you're poor, jail.
No,
through
I
the
mean,
poor
yeah,
laws
they
and
were literally
imposing. So what
telling
did
the
they do?
fucking
They had to find
poor people to eat fucking their kids in Ireland and shit like that.
That's
I mean, not really,
crazy.
but you know, yeah, bad, 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 bad. Are you writing something? Are you starting this up or?
All right, I'm back.
prison colonies.
Oh.
And so they they discovered Australia and they said, okay, we'll ship all of our surplus prisoners to Australia. And so we were set up mostly as a penal colony. And that, even though that system broke down when the transportation ended, the culture of our society was extremely anti-authority. We grew up hating authority because that's our roots, our starting point. And moreover, the isolation of Australia from the rest of the world. I mean, when I was at university, we studied a book called The Tyranny of the Distance by a famous historian. And that was how the distance from the rest of the world, I mean, it takes 24 hours to go to Europe by plane. That's a tyranny. And in the old days, it used to be 3 months by boat to get back to the old world, to get back to where our families had come from, Europe and Britain. And so that tyranny of distance creates a sort of a resilient type of culture where it's pretty tough life out here. For the early settlers, this is a very arid country. It's very dry, lots of droughts. Only parts of it are livable because most of the landmass is desert, very arid and inhospitable to human settlement. Let me clarify that. The indigenous people had worked it out very well because they had far better technologies than the white settlers had. We were very unable to live in hospitable areas. But the point I'm making is that put these sort of elements together and you've got a society growing that's totally different to the US. And that anti-authoritarian, resilient type culture led to the trade union movement being really important and led to a sort of deep suspicion of capital and a deep suspicion of capitalists and a much more what we call an egalitarian culture. Because we're all in it together. The original settlers had such a hard time making ends meet in an inhospitable climate, well away from everywhere else. They were just stuck here. And so that led to a sort of solidarity, an egalitarian solidarity. It's called mateship. And, you look out for your mates. And, then the involvement, the colonial involvement of our troops in the First and Second World War. I mean, more Australians died in the First World War per capita than any other country, and we were doing the service of the colonial masters, the British, and in the Second World War, we went against the Japanese, for example, and the bosses, the generals were the British, and the workers that died, the soldiers that died were the Aussies and the New Zealanders. And so these colonial vestiges led to an incredible solidarity and egalitarianism and mateship, and that was prime values to spawn a very powerful trade union movement and a really vehement working class solidarity. And so then you get the post-war period and the rise of the mass consumption, the creation of a middle class in an income sense, mass consumption, home ownership, full employment era during that social democratic era, and the rise of the service economy in the early 70s and women in the workforce due to equal opportunity and the sort of social changes that occurred with married women coming into the workforce. And you started to get difficulties for the trade unions because historically the trade unions had been able to create memberships through large-scale manufacturing plants and things like that, whereas with the service sector, with small-scale service providers, it's much harder to organise a trade union membership. And let's be frank, the old trade union culture was rather misogynist because it was dominated by men in the workforce, and the role of the woman was in the family, bringing up the kids. And as women came into the workforce, that sort of cultural misogyny was very tense, and again militated against. Women didn't want to be in trade unions with bully boy men, for example. That cultural divide. But then you get neoliberalism in the 70s emerging and 80s, and governments being taken over by ceasing to be mediators in the class conflict and becoming agents of capital, which is effectively what they became under neoliberalism. And that shift, as governments shifting towards becoming agents for capital, led in Australia to very pernicious industrial legislation that undermined the capacity of the trade union movement to do their jobs. And so you went from the coverage ratio in the 1970s was around 55%. So 55% of workers were in trade unions. Now it's about 15%. And that's because of all of those elements.
Wow, they shut that shit down.
Having said that, the solidarity vestiges remain. So
But they're still
neoliberal governments have tried to become more like America. And a classic example is public health and private health. So in the US, you have very little public health. You don't have a broad public health system, whereas we do. And we have a state Medicare system, which everybody, no matter who you are, can get first-class healthcare. No matter who you are, what income, whatever. You don't have to take out private insurance to get first-class healthcare. Whereas in America, if you're low income, good luck. That's my understanding. If you get sick. So that's, and the neoliberal governments in Australia have tried to undermine the public health system and get rid of the public Medicare system, but they know they can't because the solidarity culture is still very strong here. And a government that tried to eliminate public health provision wouldn't, a political party that tried to do that would never succeed. Whereas in America, it's the opposite. Trying to get less private healthcare and more public healthcare is like it's very politically fraught, as I understand it. So
Yeah, I mean that was good. Pretty much it.
Yeah. So
We covered a lot. Hey, there he is. Hey, Cameron. Maybe you don't need to make your face so large, unless you want it to be.
yeah, bro, you know me, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, my Tunchi. Yeah, we covered a
Um,
lot. That was a good video. Talked about MMT. Maybe in another video we'll cover the
dissidents.
the critique of MMM. I mean MMT. And so like just as a recap, obviously we talked about essentially what it was. It's a lens. What was this guy's name again? Shit. His name's not relevant. The point is we talked to one of the founders of MMT. Talked about his position in taxation. The government has the power to spend as it pleases. And we talked about a little history of labor. We talked about how labor was co-opted in the U.S. in the 70s by CIA, and even how in Australia it was also co-opted. Not by the CIA, but just by by American culture, I suppose, exporting culture. Americanization. And then me and Cameron had a little discussion. Government trust versus corporate trust. End goals. Short-term goals. Crazy radicals in each movement. And yeah.
Sounds about right.
Anything else you'd like to add there, Cammy?
Good night, everybody. I'm just gonna take a nice nap.
He always takes a nap. He's a napper. Well, alrighty then. That's it. Good night and good luck.